Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Eloise and I'm from West Virginia, where I grew up with my parents, my sister Daphne and my brother Robin, on an exquisitely beautiful vintage farm in the countryside, where we lived in a very charming rustic colonial farmhouse that had graced several generations of the Armstrong family. And even the brick walls of our home seemed to harbour the energy of all the bygone people that had resided here once long before us. For indeed there were times when gay laughter could be heard filtering in the hallway, and light childlike footsteps could be discerned flying hurriedly down the sweeping staircase, but no one was ever there. Sometimes in the kitchen you could smell the distinct delicious aroma of homemade baked bread, but sadly no one was baking anything at all. Then there was always the smell of lavender cologne in the library, and the aromatic odour of cigar smoke would sometimes waft through the living room. My parents would shrug their shoulders in a nonchalant, unperturbed way and say it's an old house with a history. These things should always be expected. So we grew up with these curious ethereal anomalies as an intrinsic, undiscernible part of our lives. So for us to experience something outer-worldly was as normal as brushing our teeth. Suffice to say that did not interfere in our lives in an offensive or even disturbing way. It just was part of the quintessential, rather charming, happy energy of living in an older home that basked in the glory of its vibrant, rich history, rather like a lizard sunning itself gloriously on a rock. It just was, and that was all there was to it. We lived on several acres of undulating, verdant, green, vibrant countryside, surrounded by imposing pyramid-shaped mountains and dreamy forests of statuesque trees that rose up into the heavens like masterful giants of such grace, majesty and repose, some that had seen through generations of our family and had held on to the secrets of those who have lived before us. We had a couple of meadows on our land where several of our family horses grazed happily, and a small field that was devoted especially for the goats, all who wore bells around their necks so you could hear them tinkering in the countryside. We also had hundreds of chickens and 2 rambunctious collie dogs that followed my father everywhere he went, as they were completely devoted to him. We possessed a stable block, a couple of barns and a silvery pond. The area where we lived was full of horse riding, hiking and running trails, and vast areas of wood green which stretched back for mile upon mile. Growing up, my siblings and I embraced an outdoor lifestyle vigorously, with an ardent enthusiasm and zest for the great outdoors. We enjoyed exploring the rugged pastoral countryside, most especially the woodland areas where we loved playing at the enchanting bridge over the creek, as it was a magical place to congregate. One day all 3 siblings went mountain biking down one of the country trails, and that was the first time we ever saw what I now know was a Bigfoot. At that time we had no idea what we were beholding. It was my brother Robin who spotted the critter first and shouted, "Look over there, behind the tree!" I could see a dark figure that was easily 6 foot tall, peeking at us inquisitively from behind a large tree trunk. I remember being completely astonished because this creature was unlike anything I've ever witnessed before in my life, as it looked almost human, only infinitely much bigger, and covered in long brown hair with blonde and red highlights. The critter peered at us again, looking at us through mischievous dark eyes. I believe it wanted to play with us, but it was way too shy to do so it hurriedly darted away through the wood green. We dismounted our bikes and immediately chased after the creature through the woods, but it had vanished from our sight and was disappointingly nowhere to be found. For many days we took the same bicycle trail again and again and again in the vain hope of spotting the unusual critter that we had chanced upon, for we were as interested in him as he had been in us. The bicycle trail was surrounded by highly heavily forested rocky embankments, so it was hard to see between all the trees. Sadly, we never saw the creature, although we instinctively sensed that he could see us, as we always felt as if we were not alone, and that something was watching us. One day on one of our bicycle rides, my sister Daphne became very distracted by a red fox that randomly crossed our path fleetingly, glancing at us ever so briefly, and then beelining to the trees. It was clearly not happy to have been seen by us in broad daylight. "Look," said Daphne, "a red fox!" She loosened her grip on her bicycle, while the wheels zigzagged precariously and went flying over a rocky ledge, and she ended up being thrown off her bicycle, where she hit the ground with a mighty force. It was clear that she was rather badly injured, as she was clutching her lower stomach and appeared to be in agonizing pain. "Ouch!" she cried. "It really hurts! My stomach feels all twisted." I knew at once that Daphne was not in a good way and needed urgent medical attention. I could tell she was spaced out, and her face was a ghostly white and ashen, almost as if the colour had drained from her skin. My brother and I were in a quandary as what on earth to do, and it was decided that he would go back to the farmhouse to call for help, while I stayed with my sister. That was when help of an unlikely, unusual, most unexpected source came to our rescue. It was the outlandish creature we had once observed, hiding behind the trees of all things. What on earth was it? It came bolting through the woods, sounding like a herd of bison, as it thundered towards us, running over to my sister with a look of very grave concern and consternation written on his face. The strange critter unhesitantly lifted Daphne into his powerful, strong, overlong arms and pointed towards our farmhouse, as if to say, "I'll be taking her there." I nodded, for in my youthful naivety I was quick to trust the critter's noble intent, not doubting for a moment that we were being divinely assisted. It would seem that the critter knew exactly where we lived, which was a monumental relief for me. We watched in wondrous awe as the creature ran like greased lightning ahead of us, carrying my sister in his arms, and moving speedily like a very fast, brisk wind, tunnelling across a desert. We followed far behind him on our bicycles. I was befuddled at this reticent, evasive creature that had suddenly made his appearance known, appearing from the dark shadows of the woods like a bright angel of light, once we had needed his help. But what on earth was he, I wondered? I couldn't even imagine. The only thing I could say about him was that he was like a wild boy, covered in long dark brown hair, with auburn and blonde highlights. He was easily 6 foot tall, 500 pounds and 3 feet wide across the upper shoulders. The critter was long and lanky, but very muscular, with a cone-shaped head, an incredibly human face, with deep-set intelligent eyes that seemed to denote a wisdom of way beyond his years. His countenance exuded a vigorous youthful energy, charged with an exuberant enthusiasm that gave me the distinct impression that despite his great size, he was possibly still a youngling. Once we arrived at the farmhouse, my sister was lying on the grass, yards away from the front door, groaning in pain. But the mysterious wild boy had long since departed the scene, but somehow I sensed in my gut that he was still secretly watching us. In short, my sister had suffered a devastating internal injury to the ovaries from which she made a full, very swift recovery. Daphne's surgeon sadly announced that she'd never be able to conceive children, which hit us very hard as a family, especially since this was just a bicycle accident, for goodness sake. As you can imagine, this horrifying revelation completely devastated both my parents, as they eagerly looked forward to becoming grandparents one day. However, to Daphne, who was a perpetual tomboy at the time, who wished she had been born a boy, it was just water off a duck's back. Why would she ever care about not being able to have children one day in the long, distant future? After the unforeseen accident with my sister, the wild boy became significantly less reserved, seemingly eager to interact with us. When we would ride our bicycles down the long, rugged country lanes, he would often run alongside us like a devoted, loving dog. We grew incredibly fond of him and chose to call him Bear. Sometimes we would play around the bridge over the creek together, and Bear communicated with us by using his arms in wildly dramatic, effusive gestures enhanced by expressive facial expressions, sometimes even drawing vigorously in the ground with a twig in order to be more clearly understood. For although Bear could speak a language, it was undecipherable to us and sounded like Chinese or Mandarin. From what we could fathom, his family travelled around like nomads from place to place, often following railway lines, electric pylons and watercourses, as they thoroughly enjoyed discovering new exciting locations and following food sources. Bear had a father and a mother and 2 older brothers, and he was the youngest in his family, and his people were by nature very evasive, gentle and peace-loving giants. They were exceedingly suspicious of humans, tending to keep a safe, wary distance from the likes of us. Bear revealed to us that he had been fascinated by us all of his life, and had secretly watched us since we were very small, as he had been the same. He knew so much about our family. I learnt on several occasions he had returned our billy goats to our field when they had escaped, because he had discerned how upset my father became when 1 or 2 of them went astray. To confirm this fact, he started to reenact my father's distressed, overwrought, frantic behaviour as he panicked when he couldn't find one of his goats. We all cracked up laughing, as Bear deserved an Academy Award for his masterful reenactment and interpretation of my father. We rolled on the ground and our stomachs ached from laughter, as Bear was a comedian of note who could make you laugh at the drop of a hat. I do remember Bear randomly announced once that there were some of his kind that sometimes turned rogue, exhibiting incongruous behaviour, becoming aggressively dangerous, not only to people, but their own kind as well. He described these creatures as mentally ill, disturbed, or not right in the head. Sometimes he had witnessed some bloody fights that had not always ended well for his kind, causing a great deal of distress. Over the years we could see Bear on and off, depending on how long his family stayed in our location. As children, he was our biggest secret. We never shared him with our parents, because at best we believed they would disapprove of our relationship with the wild boy, and at worst they wouldn't believe us at all. I was used to my parents doubting our credibility on things, so there were things we would willfully choose not to share with them. On one occasion, my sister and I had seen a woman that looked alarmingly like her, in her facial appearance, that is. The woman was walking across our courtyard, wearing 1800s clothes. I discerned she was attired in a magnificent blue gown that was so glamorously ornate. She looked like she belonged in a ballroom of all places. For a moment she stopped very still and looked directly at us, appearing rather caught off guard, as if she hadn't quite expected to see us. All of a sudden her image just faded, becoming more and more translucent, until she was gone completely from our sight. As it was a spurious sighting that we had observed during the day, when we excitedly told my mother about the apparition that we had discerned, she doubted our account, most especially because she didn't believe ghosts could be seen during the day. That was until she saw the apparition for herself, when she was outside in the yard hanging washing on the line. My mother was so astonished by what she was beholding that she fainted from the shock. We literally had to bring her round with smelling salts. She looked at us with eyes as wide as saucers and said, "I've just seen a ghost in the middle of the day." Over the years there have been lots of sightings of this mysterious woman on our farm. Even guests who visited us claimed to have seen a beautiful woman in an exquisitely elegant blue gown crossing their path, who they falsely assumed was Daphne dressed to the nines for a fancy dress ball. They would see her quite often whilst driving down our driveway to the house. We called her the Blue Lady. Who she was and what she was doing on our land, I'm not certain, but it is likely she may indeed have been an ancient relative of ours, and her startling, uncanny resemblance to my sister Daphne almost confirms this likelihood. My mother once joked that if Daphne wore the same dress, she could be mistaken for the ghost. Fast forward to when all my siblings had finally grown up, and we were married, and my sister Daphne moved to Florida with her lovely husband, and my brother was living in the local area where he managed another farm. I was still living on the family farm as my husband Mark was desirous to help my father manage the land and the abundant thriving hay crop, so we bought the neighbouring farm to enhance the profits of our business. We lived together as an extended family, sharing the large colonial farmhouse together. I was exceedingly happy about this arrangement because I loved living on our family farm and couldn't imagine living anywhere else in the entire world. Imagine my immense amazement when I discovered I was pregnant with twins, and when they were born, they were the biggest bundles of joy in my entire life. One day the most horrifying thing happened, which was every mother's worst nightmare. It would seem that one of my beloved precious twin babies, Diana, simply vanished from her pram on the patio. We believed she'd been abducted. No one had seen sight or sound of anything, but my mother had actually seen a sighting of the ghostly blue lady that day. She quickly scurried away to call my father so that he could see that the ghost was real. But when she returned with him, the blue lady had all but vanished. Despite an extensive police investigation, my missing daughter could not be found. As you can imagine, words fail to describe how devastated my husband and I were about our grievous, unbearable loss. We were overwhelmed with a hopeless emptiness that consumed our lives like a dark cloud of deep depression that grew bigger every single day. We were glad that we still had one daughter, but nothing could replace the one we had lost, and we couldn't envisage what dreadful fate may have befallen her. Several days later I phoned up my sister Daphne in Florida and told her the dreadful news about what had transpired, and how our precious beloved daughter Diana had seemingly vanished off the face of the earth. "Oh, that's awful," she said. "You've lost your baby. But at least you still have one left. You must be very happy about that," she said, as if she was talking about a packet of cookies that could so easily be replaced. She then randomly piped, "I think I might know what has happened to your baby." "Really?" I said. "What happened to my baby Daphne then?" When my sister spoke like this, I instinctively sensed something was up, and a knowing chill went up my spine, and my blood turned as cold as ice. Daphne continued, "I was thinking that maybe one of Bear's relatives might have pinched her, one of those wild people in the woods." "Why would they do that, Daphne? Why would one of Bear's relatives abduct my baby?" "Well, maybe one of them wanted a human child, especially if they couldn't have kids of their own." "Daphne," I said, "don't play games with me. You stole my baby, didn't you?" I don't know why, but in that instant I just knew Daphne had my baby. Call it a mother's instinct if you like. "What you talking about?" said Daphne defensively. "Why would I do such a ludicrously insane thing like that? I'm in Florida, for goodness sake." "Because, Daphne, you can't have children, that's why." Daphne burst into tears on the phone. "How did you know?" she cried. "You gave yourself away when you started blaming Bear's people for stealing my child. It just seems ridiculous to me, and you were quick to think up an outlandish idea as to how Diana had vanished. People always do that when they have something to hide, or are secretly covering up their guilt." "I'm so sorry, sis. I didn't mean to do it. I wanted a baby so badly. And you had two. It's not fair. Do you have any idea how it feels not to be able to have a baby of my own?" "You get back to the farm and bring back my baby to me right now," I shrieked down the phone, "or there'll be hell to pay. Do you understand, Daphne?" I slammed down the phone with a murderous expression on my face. I was very tempted to call the police and have Daphne arrested on sight. How dare she do this grievously wicked thing to her very own sister? It defied belief. "What on earth is going on?" asked my mother. "You look as white as a sheet." "It was Daphne that stole my baby, Mum," I cried, rushing into her arms and beginning to sob. "How could she do such a terrible thing to me? Does she have any idea the hell I've been through? Losing my baby. It's the worst thing that has ever happened to me." My mother gasped. "Oh my God, she didn't do it, did she?" "Oh my God, yes," I said. "I'm going to kill her when she gets here. What she's done is criminal and insane. I can't believe she could be this treacherous to her own flesh and blood." "Don't be too judgmental, dear," said my mother. "You'll be getting your baby back, but your poor sister must have been very desperate to have a child to do such an outrageously crazy thing. She clearly wasn't thinking straight. She saw you had given birth to twins. It must have been incredibly hard for her, knowing that she couldn't even have one for herself. Try putting yourself in her shoes before you rush to judge her too harshly. Look on the bright side. You'll be getting Diana back very soon. It could have been a whole lot worse. At least your sister was Diana's abductor, so at the very least she's in good hands and is safe and well. That's no excuse, Mum, I screamed. When she gets here, I'll kill her. Believe me, I will. I remember while I waited for Daphne to finally get to the farm, I was pacing up and down like a hamster on a wheel. My heart was thumping violently in my chest, and the rage I felt was so poignant I could almost taste it in the back of my throat. I wanted to throw all the china around the house and punch someone's lights out. I truly believe I became like a rabid dog foaming at the mouth, as my fury was insatiable. My husband surprised me by being very calm and centred. "You need to forgive Daphne, sweetheart," he piped. "We're getting little Diana back. Is that not what counts? Please don't have a large tantrum when your sister gets here. And don't be mean to her." "Don't be mean to Daphne," I said. "Mark, are you living in the Twilight Zone? She stole our daughter." "We're getting her back, sweetheart," piped Mike, looking at me frustrated. I was going to make my sister pay for what she'd done. But when she did finally arrive at the farmhouse, I grabbed my baby from her and began to sob inconsolably. I was so thrilled to see Diana again. I could see how beautiful she was, and she was oblivious to the little adventure she'd been on. I replaced her into the pram next to her baby sister, and they looked so similar I could hardly tell them apart. I then turned to my sister and screamed, "How could you do this to me? Do you have any idea what you put me through?" My sister began to sob, and I surprised myself when I took her into my arms, and we embraced, and all my anger subsided in an instant and evaporated as swiftly as the steam from a kettle. I was to learn from Daphne that she had cunningly dressed up in an 1800s blue dress as the ghost of the Blue Lady, in case anyone had seen her, which I thought was rather ingenious, I must say, even in light of the circumstances. My mother had actually seen Daphne that day, falsely assuming her to be the ghost of the Blue Lady. My sister had taken my baby back to Florida, but her husband did not know what she'd done, for he was out of the country for an entire month. I gather she hadn't worked out exactly what she was going to say to him about the new addition to their lives. To cut a long story short, you might be surprised to learn that I completely forgave Daphne for abducting my daughter, as she was my sister after all, and I really loved her. I realised how desperate she was to steal my baby. She informed me that being unable to have children had brought on suicidal feelings of the deepest despair, and on 2 separate occasions she had willingly attempted to end her own life. Daphne was amazed, bewildered and ecstatic when I offered to have a baby for her, using her own husband's sperm. "You would do that for me? You would really do that for me? After everything I've put you through?" "I would do anything for you," I assured her. And so it was I carried Daphne's baby for her for 9 long months, and she was there when I finally delivered a 7-pound 3-ounce baby girl called Grace, as she clearly was a gift from God. So Daphne did end up having her own baby after all. I would have done this for her in a heartbeat, only if she'd asked. Sometimes that's all we really need to do when we're desperate. Just ask. It really is that simple. I'm thrilled to be able to tell you that I did get to see our beloved and precious friend Bear again, one day when I was walking my twins in their pram. That was when I heard a whistle, and I could see this head peeking at me behind a tree, and these deep-set dark eyes sparkling with amusement. I nearly fainted when Bear stepped out of the shadows, because he was so colossal in size, towering at a good 8 foot tall and about 700 pounds, and he was so muscular, burly, lofty, majestic and powerful looking that I was completely dumbfounded. How could he have grown this much? For a while I stood there gawking at my friend in astonishment, for I assure you that he had grown into a critter easily as intimidating and awesome as a lion. He was a sight that would effortlessly have scared off the bravest of men. Yet I was not afraid, for I knew that however threatening the rapper appeared, that it did not reflect the soppy heart of my hairy friend, that I now know to be a Bigfoot. I ran up to Bear and cuddled the oversized teddy bear that smelt like I'd always remembered of the leaves and the dirt. Tears of joy poured down my face like heavy rain, and although he did not physically cry, it was clear that he was emotionally stirred as much as I was. We spent many joyful hours together, walking down the gorgeous woodland trail towards the pretty creek, with a bridge that conjured up so many nostalgic, magical, treasured memories of my childhood, and all the glorious fun times I'd spent with Bear and my siblings. It was a secret oasis, well out of the sight of family members, of whom Bear would wish to avoid, as he had not been acquainted with them, nor did he wish to be either, for despite his friendship with me, he was still reticent and shy by nature. He communicated to me that he was passing through the area and not staying for very long, but he had a partner and a little female youngling that he expressed were way too shy to meet me, and this did not surprise me or perturb me at all. When Bear finally left, I was sad to see him go, but he reassured me that he would be back, and that if I discovered 3 river stones on the front doorstep, I was then to go and meet him at the bridge by the creek. So since then, I've seen him 3 more times when he's visited our area. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. It was the school term in 1972, which seems like an awfully long time ago, does it not? Indeed, when I look back through the lens of time, it serves to remind me of how old I'm becoming, even though I don't feel it one little bit. Although when I stare back at my reflection and observe my receding hairline and the wrinkles that feather the corner of my eyes, I cannot delude myself a moment longer, although denial can be a very comforting thing, can it not? But I have to accept the fact that I'm definitely becoming older. I was 15 years old, believe it or not, in 1972. A young, inquisitive teenager that was not terribly sure of myself. I was putting my feelers out in the world to discover who I was, as we all do at that age. There are, of course, vibrantly colourful snippets of my teenage years that I remember rather vividly, while other less memorable events that border on the mundane, the standard or the regular, that seem to have faded into obscurity, as if they'd been washed away by a fierce tidal wave, to be remembered no more. I guess that happens to all of us, as holding on to every memory, like what we ate for dinner over 10 years ago, would be completely overwhelming, although I have heard that there are some rather unfortunate people out there that remember every last detail of their lives. I'm very glad that that is not me, as there are some things I would definitely not like to remember, like the first time I had my heart broken, or when I was attacked by a billy goat, who for some reason decided he really did not like me. I do, however, remember an outlandish event that I have never been able to forget, as some of the absurd things that happen to you in your lives over the course of time have a funny way of sticking to you resolutely, like superglue, almost as if those memories have merged into the very fabric of your DNA and become a part of your natural makeup and identity. That's the way I look at it anyway. Over the years I have even challenged my own recall on this paradoxical matter and asked myself if this happened at all. But I assure you it did. But even now it seems so incredibly surreal. In 1972, I attended a highly regarded school with my brother Danny, whose real name was Daniel. My mother named him after Daniel in the lion's den, believing my brother was going to be a fearsome warrior one day that would easily defeat his foes, or Goliaths if you like. When I say that, I'm not meaning literally, in a modernized sense of the word, of course. My mother emphatically believed in the power of names. We were the Glover brothers, and 18 months apart in age. We got on reasonably well, although Danny at that stage of his life had an intense side to his character which I never really liked. He could blow a short fuse very easily if you rubbed him up the wrong way. When I say intense, that's exactly what I mean. And it was my brother's intense reaction to things that plays a pivotal part in this rather unconventionally weird story of mine. For indeed it was this eccentric character trait of his that drew us into the woods that lunchtime all those years ago, on what I would describe as an unassuming spring morning, that changed our understanding of the world as we know it forever. Danny took things very seriously,
and was easily affronted by the quirkiest things that would be like water off a duck's back to the vast majority of people like you or me, but never to my brother. Besides all that, he lacked a sense of humour, taking himself far too seriously all the time. He failed to see the funny side of things. Certainly if you teased him about anything, instead of laughing at himself, or even at you, or the situation, so to speak, he would feel undermined, and that was when you needed to watch yourself, as you could consequently find yourself playing in shark-infested water, as my brother could bite back really hard if he got heated enough about something. Ostensibly from an early age, I learnt not to provoke my brother. I didn't enjoy being caught up in the crossfire of his outrage, which I would avoid at all costs. I was easygoing and relaxed. I preferred settling for an easier life, without any angst. I'm afraid to say Danny would get offended by the silliest, most trivial, irrelevant things that really were no big deal at all. On one occasion, for example, I clearly remember my mother bought me a fashionable shirt from a boutique in town. She failed to buy my brother one at the same time, as he was significantly bigger than I was, and they didn't have any larger sizes in stock at the time. Most people would be absolutely fine with that. You could bet one thing, that my brother did not take this news very kindly. Let's just say he read so much more into the scenario than was really there, personalizing everything, so it was always about him. "You like Eric better than me," he'd say to my mother. "I bet you they had my size at the boutique. All along, you just didn't want to buy me a shirt. Admit it. Eric's your favourite son. That's why you bought him a shirt and didn't buy me one." My mother would stare at my brother incredulously, with confounded eyes, as if she couldn't comprehend what the fuss was all about. "What are you talking about, love? I told you they didn't have your size in stock. They've sold out of the larger sizes. I can hardly buy you a shirt if they haven't got your size in stock, can I? I haven't got a magic lamp like Aladdin to rub in order to change the outcome miraculously. The very attentive shop assistant told me they'd be getting your size in due course, and she'll phone me when they come in. Then I will go and buy you your shirt. I'm not playing favourites, love. The idea is ridiculous. If you must know, I was rather upset that I couldn't get your size." My brother would go into a big sulk that would sometimes last for days. "I don't want a stupid shirt anyway," he would say, making it absolutely clear to my mother he was not remotely amused. He had been left out, and my brother hated that with a passion. He liked it when the attention was focused on himself, because being forgotten about or overlooked was unthinkable to him. When my mother did finally get him the shirt in his size, my brother trashed it and told her in no uncertain terms, "I don't want your stupid shirt. I told you that. Why did you go and buy it for me?" He was still brooding over the event an entire week later. We were very lucky, as the school we attended was literally across the road from where we lived, so we could get up later than most of the kids who would need to travel to school, although some walked, others were lifted to school by their parents, while others took the school bus. We were what I considered to be extremely privileged by this. We could get to school at the drop of a hat, and if we forgot anything behind at home, we could easily sneak back out of the school and go and grab it. The local area where we lived had a countrified, idyllic atmosphere. There was no doubt we lived in an enviable part of the world, surrounded by woods, bursting with abundant indigenous wildlife, a plethora of rich fauna and a selection of intrepid hiking trails that you could easily explore in a multitude of different ways, whether it be on foot, mountain bike, quad bike, or even horseback. It wasn't uncommon to see people on horseback trotting past the school gates at the end of a school day. These days the same area in West Virginia bears absolutely no resemblance to the way it looked when I was a boy. It is so much more built up these days, and the house where I grew up as a boy looks nothing like it did when I was young. The current owners did massive renovation projects on the building, transforming our house into something pretty nondescript and institutional looking. In fact, I think our beloved old house looks more like a public toilet block than anything else. I'm glad to say much of the woodland has thankfully been preserved, which I'm very grateful for, as I hate to see green areas becoming commercialised and built up. The school I attended was pretty mainstream, but there were always pupils that stood out like the queen bee among all the workers. In my brother's class at school, a young 16-year-old teenager by the name of Lucas Fairweather was turning heads among parents, teachers, and of course students. He was one of those enviable people that shone out like a bright star in the firmament, that you knew was going places, and when he ultimately left school one day, his name might end up in lights in whatever profession he pursued. I do know he was a great student and a star athlete. He was the kind of 16-year-old teenager that any parent would be absolutely delighted to call their son. He excelled at absolutely everything, sailing through his grades as seamlessly as a boat over smooth, untroubled waters. I always used to think it was very apt that Lucas's surname was Fairweather, because everything went well if Lucas was on your team. And if you were to select someone to help you have a fighting chance of winning in sports or class quizzes, you would select Lucas every time to be on your team, unless you were a fool, of course. I think every girl in the school, if interested in boys, that is, would likely have wanted to date Lucas, if given the chance. If I'd been a girl, and I was that way inclined, I'd have wanted to date him myself, as he had absolutely everything going for him. He was a natural athlete, was good-looking, intelligent, and charming. Beyond all that, he had a great sense of humour. And what's not to like about that? He was the whole package, the chocolate, the nougat, and the nuts. And what girl does not want to bite into that delicious sequence of flavours, from the crisp to the sweet, unless, of course, you have a nut allergy. When I was at school, I was a year lower than my 16-year-old brother Danny, who always made absolutely certain I never forgot that I was the young one in the family, who had a whole lot of learning to do. It was like from day one, he wanted to establish who was boss in our household, and who called all the shots. As far as he was concerned, he was the eldest, and I was never allowed to forget that for a single second, and believe me, I never did. I could sometimes feel quite intimidated and overawed by my older brother, who on the outside would appear to have it together, and seemed self-assured, confident, and a little cocky. But he did have his raging insecurities, that he hid rather well from people, but believe me, I knew all about them, for they stood out to me like a shark's fin in the ocean. As far as Lucas Fairweather was concerned, I physically witnessed many a pretty girl at school, going all silly and giggly over him, whenever he walked past them in the school corridors, carrying a large pile of books on his person, as he made his way to the various different classes. He seemed to cause a stir wherever he went, like a large stone being flung into a huge body of water, and causing a ripple effect. Many girls really fancied him, and the most peculiar thing about it all, that was so blindingly in your face, was that Lucas didn't appear to be aware of the interest he had sparked among all the girls, as if he was so focused on his sports and other school activities, he didn't notice what was going on around him, that was staring him in the face. I understand in my brother's class, Lucas Fairweather was also the class clown. Not only was he academic, not only was he sporty, but he was humorous as well. He never took himself too seriously, and he made his classmates, including the teacher, laugh, which is an enviable thing to be able to do. But I know his father was a very good stand-up comedian in his spare time, so I suspect Lucas was rather like his father on the humour front. I do know he was forever cracking jokes, and never been afraid to make fun of himself, which again is an admirable quality to have in one as young as he was. Needless to say, the dewy-eyed teachers loved Lucas Fairweather, and his glowing report cards were as bright as the brilliant sun on a good day. And I say that without any exaggeration. I think everyone instinctively knew that when this young man left school one day, he was going to be someone. He'd be the kind of person that would one day become an astronaut, or a sports star, or something impressive like that. He just stood out like the king on a chessboard in a very good way. Not like the kid with the bottle glasses or the crooked teeth wearing an ugly set of braces, who stood out for different, more obvious reasons. Sometimes I got the distinct impression that Lucas would have been quite happy to be a simple pawn on the chessboard, like the vast majority of us, so that he could just fit in like a regular kid. But I don't think he really liked the light shining on him so conspicuously, or the incessant attention he always received. I'm not sure he actually liked that. I do think he might have been slightly bashful in that regard, and hid it rather well, in the same way as my brother Danny successfully hid his insecurities. I do think a lot of the boys at school were naturally envious of the sprightly 16-year-old, who'd probably happily have traded places with them in a heartbeat. Lucas was one of those annoyingly gifted people, who was good at everything, but to be fair, he was never remotely conceited about his own accomplishments, but remained humble and down to earth. There was, of course, one person that hated Lucas Fairweather with a burning passion, and I'm afraid to say that was my own brother Danny. He was not adverse to pulling Lucas apart with his unkind, cruel words, like a nasty kid might take great pleasure in tearing the legs off a spider, but he always did this in the privacy of our own home. He incessantly ranted on and on about his loathing for Lucas Fairweather. "I hate that dude," he told me one day, as we were crossing the road from school to walk back to the house. "He's so full of himself, always knows the answers to all the questions. He went up in front of the class today to correct my algebra mistake. Can you believe that? It was so humiliating, especially with some of the girls watching me make a complete idiot of myself in front of absolutely everybody. I got the math all wrong. Lucas put his hand up in the class, told the teacher he knew where I'd gone wrong, and she told him to come up to the board and to correct my pitiful mistake." "Who was teaching math?" I asked. "Mrs. Bundle, you know, the one with the blue rinse hair and the pink glasses. I'm telling you, that woman loves Lucas to bits. You can see it in her eyes." "Yes, I know the one you mean." Well, the silly woman was practically purring at Lucas like a contented Cheshire cat, looking at him as if he was her favourite scoop of ice cream that she wanted to eat very slowly, to savour the flavour, if you know what I mean. In her saccharine, sweet treacle voice, she said to him, "Do you get it, Danny? Do you know where you went wrong? Did Lucas here not do a great job in explaining your mistake so eloquently to you?" I wanted to go up to Lucas, who was smiling so brightly that he made the white walls in the classroom look off colour, and pull his ears so very hard. Everyone was looking at him as if he was some kind of a demigod, and me as if I was a clueless wreck who didn't know what day of the week it was, let alone how to figure out a damn algebra equation. "Don't take it too personally, bro, if you want my advice," I said to my brother, giving him an encouraging slap on the back. "I'm sure it wasn't as bad as all that. I've had my mistakes corrected hundreds of times. It's no big deal. Besides, Lucas Fairweather, well, he's good at everything, isn't he? You get people like that, who frustratingly know the answers to absolutely everything. It's like Mum says, in life there'll always be someone cleverer, funnier and more handsome than you. And that's the way the cookie crumbles. It is what it is." "Well, Lucas knows it, doesn't he, bro? And that's the problem," said my brother, pulling a furious face. "I think he knows every single girl in our class fancies him rotten, and I hate that about him." "I don't agree with you there," I said. "And even if it is true, why should you care if everybody fancies him? Lucas doesn't even have a girlfriend, so he's not interested in dating, is he?" "What are you saying? That he's not straight?" said my brother, raising a brow. "You're wrong there, Eric. Lucas is so straight he'd make a pencil look crooked." "I never said he wasn't, bro. He's just passionate about sports and stuff like that. He's probably too preoccupied to have a girlfriend. He's absorbed with his life, isn't he?" "Well, whatever. That prideful loser, he needs taking down a peg or two, don't you think? Showing me up in class like that today was demoralizing. I'm not going to sit back and take that kindly. I'd like to wipe that silly little smile off his smug face and see him squirm like a cockroach crushed beneath my boot. I'd like to squash him so damn hard, see all the gunk coming out of him, and then I wonder how good he'd feel about that." I watched my brother stamping the ground furiously, as if Lucas was beneath his boot in that moment. The move seemed to bring him a sense of satisfaction, almost as if he had exterminated Lucas Fairweather for good by the mere gesture. "Oh my God! You're jealous of Lucas, aren't you?" I told my brother with a muted laugh. It's as plain as day. I knew it. Look at you, you've gone all red in the face, I said, pointing at him. Admit it. It's true. Don't worry, everybody's envious of him. He's good at everything. All the girls like him, don't they? I can't say I blame them, really. He's good-looking, he's funny. But wanting to squash him under your boot, I'm sorry, but that's going too far, bro. You're overreacting. You need to cool down a bit. You're taking the incident in class far too seriously. Everybody's probably forgotten about it a long time ago. You're still harping on about it. I wouldn't let it worry me if I were you. For God's sake, bro, let it go, will you? You have no idea what it was like for me, Eric. Absolutely no idea. And I don't expect you to understand either, because you've always been very good at math. It was denigrating. All the girls in class were giggling when Lucas walked up to the blackboard to correct my mistake. They were looking at him with shiny puppy dog eyes and giving me pitiful looks, as if they felt sorry for me, because I was so dim, too dim to get the answer right. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I felt so humiliated, so ashamed, so small. You're mistaken, bro, I tried to assure my brother. Being good at math doesn't mean you're better than anybody else, does it? Besides, you're a sports star, aren't you? And that's got to count for something. Besides, I think you've got Lucas Fairweather completely wrong. Everyone genuinely likes him. He's cool. I don't think that Lucas is arrogant or opinionated as you suggest. That's why people like him so much, don't they? I'm sure he wasn't intentionally trying to chasten you during class. He just politely corrected you. Big deal. Someone had to correct your mistake, didn't they? If it wasn't the teacher, it would have been somebody else, I suspect. To my surprise, my nonchalant, off-the-cuff comments provoked my brother to anger. He turned around and grabbed me by the collar. He began to shake me quite hard. "Say that again, Eric," he growled. "What did you just say? Go on. I dare you. Say it." I could see such a treacherous, brooding, dark look in my brother's eyes that for the first time in my young life it made me genuinely feel afraid of him, like a canary that's got caught in the cat's jaws and is desperate to escape, and has to somehow persuade that cat to let him go, which is no easy feat, believe me. My heart began to flutter wildly in my chest. I frantically searched for the right words to appease my brother's indignance. Let's just say, if looks could kill, Danny was wearing that belligerently capricious look on his face. I didn't want one of his fists to go slamming into my head. Not again. Please God, no, not again. "What did you say, Eric?" he repeated. "You're not answering me, bro. Isn't it funny how you've suddenly gone very mute, when seconds ago you were running your mouth off like a car engine and appeared to have an opinion on absolutely everything? That's not true, bro. You know it's not true. I wasn't running my mouth off. I wasn't. I don't have an opinion on everything, as you say. I just told you you're overreacting to the incident you had in class. I don't believe it was a big deal. I'm sorry, but I don't. I also think it was mean to say you wanted to squash Lucas Fairweather under your boot. He's not a bad person. I thought you were implying that I was dim because of the math mistake I made in class, and because everybody was giggling at me. Then didn't you say something about my being jealous of Lucas Fairweather?" said my brother, glaring at me. "Of course I didn't say that," I lied. "I never implied for a second that you were dim. Where did you get that idea from?" My brother's anger subsided. I breathed a huge sigh of relief. I felt for a moment as if I'd been walking on eggshells. It was a sticky situation. "Just so you know, Eric, let's get one thing straight, shall we? Before you start filling your head with weird ideas. I'm not remotely jealous of Lucas Fairweather. Hear that? I'm not jealous of him." My brother snorted. "The guy's a loser, even if everybody else cannot see it plainly, because they're as blind as bats, aren't they? People are so beguiled by his charms that he turns on at the drop of a hat, like a switch in an electric socket. I know what he's really like. He's like an inflated beach ball that needs to be punctured to to get rid of all that hot air inside of him. As I said, Eric, he needs taking down a peg or two, and you're the one that's going to help me do it. We're both going to make him realize how small, inconspicuous, insignificant, and pathetic he actually is. We're going to make him think twice about raising his hands up in the classroom to correct one of my math mistakes, so he can get off on undermining and patronizing me in front of the entire class like he did today. What are you talking about? I asked my brother in a quivering voice. I didn't like where this conversation was heading one bit. What did my brother mean by taking Lucas down a peg or two, or because he outsmarted him in math? I was not a bully, and had no intention of becoming one either. I was raised better than that, to respect all people. The last thing I wanted to do was to get dragged into one of my brother's muddy juvenile spats, especially over something as ridiculous as this. Big deal. The guy corrected his math mistake in front of the entire class. Who gives a toss about that anyway? Why all this overreaction on my brother's part? I couldn't understand any of it. My brother's jealousy over Lucas Fairweather was insane. I mean what I say, bro, said my brother, turning around to face me with formidable, fierce eyes that warned me not to push any of his buttons, or I might just be very, very sorry if I did. You're going to help me, Eric. Put Lucas Fairweather firmly in his place. Do you get where I'm going with this? I nodded sheepishly. I didn't have any other option. My brother continued, If you don't do as I say, I'll wring your neck like that of a chicken that's about to be cooked in a crock pot for dinner. At this, my brother began to graphically act out the gesture of wringing a chicken's neck, and then discarding the bird in a crock pot. Get my drift, bro, he said, looking at me with a smug satisfaction on his face, as he knew I would refuse him nothing. I had more sense than to do that, as I was often intimidated by my older brother, given his sheer size and strength. In my 15 years of life, which wasn't terribly long at the time, I had certainly learnt some discombobulating lessons with my brother that I didn't care to repeat. You know what they say, once burnt, twice shy. That was it for me all over. I had been beaten up by my brother once before, when he'd lost his temper with me on a walk back home from school, like the one we were enjoying on this fine, ever so slightly chilly afternoon in early spring. It was often for some uncanny reason, when crossing the road over to our house, when disputes between me and my brother would naturally arise, when we failed to agree on something that we were discussing together. I was not such a wuss that I didn't stand up for myself from time to time. I'd like to say I wasn't completely under my brother's thumb, although I did sometimes feel like a puppet being pulled by his strings. I knew I needed to be guarded and to watch my every word with Danny, or I could end up like a frog placed in cold water, not knowing that as the temperature is slowly turned up in the saucepan, that I'm about to be boiled alive. That's the kind of scenario that happened with me rather frequently when dealing with my brother's irrational outbursts. I cannot exactly remember what the argument was about on that occasion, when my brother completely lost it with me, but I can guarantee you one thing, it was probably over something meaninglessly trivial. Anything could set my brother off. My carefree words had so obviously affronted him, so much so, bruising his fragile ego, and his only way was to react to it in a violent outburst. He had fortuitously lashed out at me with one of his formidable fists. My brother was big and strong. Even when he was born, he was bigger than most babies. Even the midwife was stunned by his sheer size. When my mother first laid eyes on him, she said, "Goodness gracious me, he's huge, isn't he? My guess is he's going to be a first-class footballer," she had said proudly. She may have been right about my brother being bigger and having a first-class kick on him, but what she failed to realise is he'd probably be kicking me, rather than a football as his preferable choice. Even at 16 years old, when a lot of boys are struggling to fill out, Danny possessed one of those enviably muscular builds, without having to try hard with lifting weights and stuff like that. He didn't have to work hard, but naturally looked ripped. Next to my brother, I was pretty puny and pathetic, rather like a string bean, and I hated that. My brother was naturally good at all sports, but not nearly as clever as Lucas Fairweather academically, and that pissed him off. I think he was always comparing himself to the guy, and was ferociously competitive, with a drive to be the best in absolutely everything. So his failures in math were driving him absolutely crazy. When I was 15, I'd grown tall like my father, but I was rail thin and would do everything in my power to put on weight. At one point I was drinking litres and litres of cow's milk to help me bulk up, but all I did was break out in loads of spots, and the weight gain absolutely eluded me, like a balloon on the wind, that you can never catch, no matter how hard you try. Boy, I would appreciate to go back to that metabolism now. My remembrance of that afternoon, when my brother lashed out at me, is somewhat bleary and rather vague, as you might expect. I do, however, recall seeing my brother's rather indignant face, growing as red as a field of poppies. This was a clear sign that I had enraged him in some way, or caused him undue embarrassment. I had clearly said something to make him hopping mad. I recall his fist pounding down on me so hard out of the blue. So I received this horrible, unprecedented thump on my head that dazed me, that for a second I was virtually seeing stars. I fell backwards onto the ground, into a sorry crumpled heap, rather like a pancake in a pan, under the saucer magnolia tree in our front yard, and everything went black. I ended up being rushed into the ER by ambulance, and waking up hours later in a hospital bed, wondering where on earth I actually was. I was suffering from a mild head concussion. It was my mother who found me lying comatose under the saucer magnolia tree in the front yard. She initially thought I was dead. She screamed out so loudly that some young schoolboys from over the road, who were waiting for a school bus, came running towards us. The ambulance was called at once, and my mother was told by one of the boys that I still had a pulse. She cried out with relief, saying, "Oh, goodness gracious, I thought I'd lost my baby. I thought I'd lost my baby." I had no memory of any of this, as the blow I'd sustained to the head from my brother Danny had rendered me temporarily unconscious. When I came around from my concussion, my parents asked me what the hell had happened to me. My father looked very affronted that I had been hurt so viciously. The quiet man threatened to kill the person that had harmed me. "Whoever he is, I'll come after him myself with my baseball bat and knock his lights out, I will. No one hurts my boy." I simply told my parents that I couldn't remember what had happened to me. That is always a good utilitarian answer to employ when you don't know what to say about a matter. I used it enough over the years to my advantage, and it always worked for me. My mother, like my father, had been very concerned that some deranged thug at school had hit me in the head. She wanted to avenge them, report them to the principal perhaps, but that was never going to happen, as I became very mute about the matter. She had no way of knowing, of course, the thug responsible for this random act of barbarity was living under her very own roof, and was her own son Danny. Had she known this, she'd have been absolutely mortified. In truth, I cannot believe, as a discerning, insightful mother as she was, who knew all too well how Danny could almost become sectionable over the slightest disagreement, had not easily guessed what was really going on. I was to learn later, as being a father myself now, that we can be incredibly biased when it comes to our own children, believing only the best of them. At the time it was more than my life was worth to grass on my brother Danny, unless I wanted something far worse to happen to me. And besides, I was not a snitch. I would never have snitched on my brother. That would not be a cool thing to do. Danny, of course, came up to my hospital bed, lowering his voice into a quiet warning, so that the parents couldn't overhear our conversation. "Don't tell the parents it was me that did this to you, bro. Understand?" I had nodded. He then patted me gently and said, "Sorry, bro. You just made me mad as a hatter, but I didn't mean to hurt you like this." I forgave him in an instant. I knew he meant it. To be fair, despite my brother's intense moments, when he completely lost focus on being reasonable, he was, by all accounts, a rather decent guy, but the kind of person who would do well taking an anger management course to help him deal with those moments of unbridled rage that would bubble up inside him like the molten lava of a volcano. The memory of that unfortunate event flashed before me like a warning red light on this occasion, as we walked back from school together. It sounded a cautionary note in my head. Daniel glared at me intractably. I knew that whatever plans he had in store for poor Lucas Fairweather, to bring him down a peg or two, they were not going to be pretty. I dreaded to think what harebrained scheme my brother Danny had up his sleeve for Lucas Fairweather. I could only hope he was going to teach the young teenager a lesson, by putting a snake in his satchel perhaps, something light-hearted and fun like that, which wouldn't hurt anyone. Lucas's reaction to the snake, of course, would naturally be hilariously funny, although whether that would bring him down a peg or two was definitely debatable. One thing I did know about Lucas Fairweather, that he was absolutely petrified of all snakes. This was an irrational fear that had plagued his life, which he was not reluctant to admit. Everyone in our entire school knew he had a terror of snakes. I do know that when he was little, he had personally witnessed his uncle's pet boa constrictor trying to strangle his pet Yorkshire Terrier. Luckily, the Yorkshire Terrier was spared by Lucas's uncle's quick intervention, when he disentangled the poor dog from the constrictor's formidable grasp. But I sneakily suspect the brutal images of that inauspicious event on a young boy like Lucas had burnt a dreadful fear into his heart about snakes that was not easy to expunge, and who could blame him for that? Seeing that must have been very traumatizing for a young boy. I think Lucas's incessant fear of snakes was possibly the only chink in his armour. I was sure my brother Danny would employ this incapacitating fear of his to his full advantage, by possibly borrowing our next-door neighbour's snake, which also conveniently happened to be a boa constrictor. On one occasion, when someone had brought a snake to school to show off his pet to the entire class during a biology lesson, when reptiles were being studied, my brother informed me that Lucas Fairweather had run out of the classroom like a bat out of hell, with a face that had grown as white as a sheet. He had physically trembled, as if suffering from some post-traumatic stress disorder. I gather it had been rather distressing to watch, and the boy had been told by the teacher to put the snake away at once. "You may not like Lucas," I said to my brother. "I get it, I do. I'm sure he's not everybody's cup of tea. But what has he ever done to you to make you want to avenge him so much? Just let it go, bro. Even if he bugs the life out of you, ignore him. That's the best thing to do. I promise you everyone has forgotten about the blunder you made during your math class. Only you could worry about something like this and put so much energy into something that doesn't matter a jot." "Matters not a jot? Is that what you've got to say?" said my brother, friskily grabbing me by the collar, holding my shirt so tightly that he almost blocked my airways so that I could barely breathe, as his dark, hostile eyes bored into me. I was oscillating my arms frantically, like an octopus, trying to pull my brother's hands off me, to shake him off my body. Finally he did release his hold on me, and I took some desperate gasps of air, rather like an oxygen-deprived seal that has been stuck under the ice bed for far too long. "Please stop!" I cried out. "What are you doing, Danny? Get your hands off me! I can't breathe! You're suffocating me! What the hell is wrong with you? Do you want to kill me or something? Because you very nearly did just then. You were the one that made me do that, Eric. Are you trying to make me mad or something?" he said, raising a warning fist at me, and thankfully choosing to punch the air instead of my face. I suppose I had to be grateful for small mercies. "If I want some judicious advice from my little brother, I will ask for it, won't I? You were not in the classroom when I was being humiliated, were you, Eric? You have absolutely no idea how horrible it was for me. I can't get the tormenting images out of my head, however hard I try. I was humiliated, Eric. Get it? Humiliated. Do you understand the full meaning of the word or not?" "Sorry, bro," I said. I wasn't thinking. My brother's face softened. "That's the problem with you, Eric. You don't think, do you? You say anything that comes into that head of yours. Look, I don't want to hurt you, bro, but talking about Lucas Fairweather makes my blood boil. I can't help it, bro. I'm sorry to scare you. But I can't stand him, and even his name sets my nerves on edge. What's Lucas ever done to you, bro? I'm sorry, but there's more to the story than meets the eye. Come on, what's this really about? All right, I get it. You got humiliated during math. But all this overreaction over some math algebra equation is overkill, is it not? I asked rather gingerly. Something else is going on, bro. I can smell it. My brother's lips twitched, as if he was holding back something. He snorted and finally lifted his hand up in mock surrender. Well, there is slightly more to the story that I admitted to tell you. If you must know, there's a girl involved, he said, his face flushing a shade of pink. I knew it! I knew it! I chuckled. You're so predictable, Danny. I can read you like a glass pane. There had to be a girl behind this to get you so pent up like this. So I'm guessing this girl you have the hots for witnessed you having your math equation corrected by Lucas Fairweather on the blackboard. Is that right? And it crushingly did your head in. I think I get it now. That's what's going on here. You didn't want to be made of a fool of and snubbed in front of her. And I get it, bro. I really do. Well, something like that. Only it was worse. If you must know, the girl I really like was looking at Lucas Fairweather as if he was the Michelangelo's David. Do you know what that feels like, bro? The girl you fancy, ogling your nemesis? It was excruciatingly painful to watch. It stung like hell. Who is she, bro? I had no idea you were into any of the girls at school. I thought you liked Amy Price from church. You've had your eyes on her for a long time, have you not? I grinned cheekily. But you've never had the balls to ask her out. But I've seen the way you've looked at her at church, like a soppy St. Bernard drooling over a meaty bone. I like Amy, but not like this girl. This girl is in a whole different league, bro. And I mean it. She's hot, so hot you could burn your fingers if you even touched her. I chuckled. Goodness gracious me, bro. You've got it bad to describe her like that. Spill, will you? Don't keep me in suspense. I'm dying to know who she is. My brother paused for a brief moment, and then he said, You may know her. The name's Janice Kildare. Oh, yes, I do. The new girl in your class at school, isn't she? I've seen her round. She's very pretty. You like her, do you, bro? I really, really like her, said Danny, boxing the air furiously with a clenched fist. It would seem a tempestuously untamed rage blew through him, like the wispy white smoke that spirals out of a chimney on a cold winter's day. I realized in this prominent second that my brother was actually hopping mad. There was a distant, faraway look in his eyes, suggesting that he was reliving the ignominy of the classroom event all over again, when Lucas Fairweather degraded him by correcting his math equation in front of the entire class. That's the problem, you see, when you're an intense person like my brother was. You can take yourself far too seriously. He simply couldn't stand the brutal abasement and come down that he was feeling right now, rather like a burn on your hand that still causes pain long after you've touched the hot pot you pulled yourself away from. In this moment, he was like one of those pressure cookers on the stove top that is about to explode if you don't handle him with the utmost of care. My mother called the spaced-out look of my brother's his zombie face. If she wanted any chores done around the house, like the rubbish bags, for example, being put out for the bin collectors every Friday morning, or for me to help her bring in the shopping from the car from her grocery shop in town, she always preferred to ask me for these helpful favours. I would ask my mother why she was getting me to do all the chores. She would lower her voice promptly and say, Well, I can't possibly ask Danny, can I? He's wearing his zombie face. I would nod with understanding, and without another word, agree to do the chores for her. I knew what my mother was talking about. My mother would say to me, Danny's a complicated teenager, love. When I was warned that the teenage years were always difficult for a parent, I never saw Danny coming. He broke the mould, you know, on the word difficult, taking it to a whole new level. That boy is a challenge to raise, let me tell you. I regret to say, even as his mother, I never understood him, although, believe me, he certainly tested me and your father to the extreme. And sometimes our patience has worn terribly thin. Danny can be peevishly cranky and cantankerous at the best of times, always blowing out hot and cold air, you know. Sometimes I feel we have an alien entity living among us, a whole new human species, if you like. You mean you had a relationship with an alien from outer space, Mum? I teased, who lives by his own set of rules. Very well put, love. Something rather like that, said my mother, giving me a cheeky wink. But don't tell your father I told you that. He'd be absolutely mortified if he thought I'd been fraternizing with little green men. I chuckled. Needless to say, love, my advice as far as Danny is concerned is to ignore him when he's like that, and give him the space he needs to calm down. You don't go poking a hungry tiger, do you? You feed the tiger, leave him be, until he's settled and is more amenable. My father was a very even-tempered, quiet, unassuming man, but he sagaciously stayed out of my brother's way when Danny was in one of his antisocial moods that were the bane of his teenage years, it would seem. My dad told me once that his own father, whom I never had the privilege to meet, as he died before I was born, would also act out like Danny did. We always knew when he got into this kind of grouchy, morose mood to give him space and plenty of it, my dad would say. When you did that, the tempestuous waters of his irascible indignance would finally settle, like oil on top of water, and everything would be fine. My mother always used to say after my father had eaten a very big square meal, he was much more pleasant to be around, which is why when he did die, he was so incredibly big, the funeral director had to personalize his own coffin for him, said my father with a chuckle. My mother kept feeding the man to keep him sweet, and it worked, let me tell you. All I wanted to do on this occasion was to get back into our home and to make myself a ham and cheese sandwich as a snack. I was starving hungry, and the last thing I wanted to do was to talk about Lucas Fairweather, or about the new girl Janice Kildare in my brother's class, or about the unfortunate opprobrium he had experienced in the class that morning that he refused to let go. I wanted to throw all these shenanigans out with the dirty bathwater and forget that they'd ever happened. The trouble was my brother would never allow that to happen. Janice Kildare had seemed to me like a nice enough girl. She was pretty too. I'd seen her around school from time to time. She'd always flashed me a bright smile. She had long dark brown hair, green eyes and a fair skin, but I think her face was perfectly symmetrical, which meant she was pleasing on the eye. Why did I get this ominous, very unsettling feeling that my brother Danny was completely fixated on Janice Kildare? I could smell trouble brewing, like wood burning in the air from someone's fireplace on a cold winter's day, and I didn't like the feeling one little bit. I told you, I rarely like Janice, he told me again. But do you know, thanks to Luke Fairweather, she's not going to give me a second glance, is she? I know she'd fancy me rotten if he didn't happen to be around. But no, he has to steal my thunder, does he not? He made me look stupid in math. Now she'll never like me. I'm sure that's not true, I said to my brother. You're selling yourself short. You're good-looking, aren't you? And clever. Except for in math, I said quickly, trying to build up my brother's ego, as if carefully laying Lego blocks one on top of another, and hoping they'd not come crashing down in one big messy heap. Look, bro, I've never had a girlfriend, so I am the last person that should be giving you advice. But just let her get to know you first. That's what I think you should do. She's new at school, isn't she? Give her time. She moved here from Nob Hill in Albuquerque, I believe, about 3 months ago. When she knows you're interested in her, I'm sure she will reciprocate your interest. I mean, you're one of the sports stars in our school. Who wouldn't want to be dating someone like you? You could ask her out, couldn't you? And I'm sure she will say yes. She'll be mad if she doesn't, bro. You're the whole package. You've got it all going on. That's what everybody thinks. She's not interested in me, bro. Can't you get that through your thick skull? Or haven't you heard a single word I've been saying? My brother snapped. I told you, my big stumbling block is Lucas Fairweather. She's only got eyes for that lower form of pond life. She is so obviously interested in only him, and definitely not me. But are you sure? I asked him coyly. Of course I'm bloody sure, otherwise I wouldn't be saying so, would I? I'm not stupid. Janice makes it blindingly obvious she likes him. She stares at him in class with such an animated, peppy look on her face, with mawkish puppy eyes. When I plucked up the courage to go and talk to her at break yesterday, do you know what she bloody said to me? No, what did she say? Well, she asked me if I knew whether Luke Fairweather had a girlfriend or not. Her eyes went all dewy. She started to giggle, making it blindingly obvious she fancied him rotten. She asked me if Lucas had a type, stuff like that. She talked to me as if I was nothing but a friend to her. She asked me how she could get Lucas Fairweather to like her. Can you believe that, Eric? The girl I like wanted bloody tips on how to make Lucas Fairweather like her. She fluttered her eyelashes at me and said, I've only been here for 3 months. I'm from Albuquerque. My dad was transferred here. I really like Lucas, but how can I get him to notice me? Have you got any good ideas? You play a lot of sport with him, don't you? You must know him rather well. I guess he must talk to you in the cloakroom and stuff. So what did you say to that? I asked my brother. Well, I told her the truth, didn't I? That Lucas had never had a girlfriend before a day in his life, because he was too focused on his sport and his stamp collecting, stuff like that. I told her I didn't think he was interested in dating, and you know what she said to me? I think he's a bit shy, that's all. I know he seems all confident and self-assured on the surface, but as far as girls are concerned, he's rather self-effacing. I've seen him flash me a few demure glances in class. He likes me, but he hasn't got the courage to do anything about it. He needs a nudge in the right direction, don't you think? My mother says sometimes the girl has to take the initiative if the boy is shy, and I think she's right about that. Why should everything always be done the old-fashioned way? Sometimes we girls need to take the bull by the horns and go after what we want, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think someone like Luke would probably appreciate me taking the initiative in that regard. My bet is he's just painfully shy. She said that to you, bro? I'm sorry. You're right. She clearly does like Lucas. But it doesn't mean all hope is lost, bro, I said encouragingly. See, I told you she likes him, said my brother. And the worst part of it all, Eric, is maybe she's right. What's that supposed to mean? I asked. You assume, Eric, that Lucas Fairweather is not interested in girls. But supposing he really is, but is hiding it rather well, because he's desperately shy, like Janice suggests. I could never work Lucas out, because all the girls like him, but he shrinks away from them. I think Janice is absolutely right. He's shy. That would make a whole lot of sense, wouldn't it? If Janice makes it clear she likes him, then there's a very real possibility that an opportunity for me to become her boyfriend will slip through my fingers like butter. I can't let that happen, bro. I'm really into her. Well, I said, it's not all bad news, you know, bro. For a start, Janice treats you like a good friend. She confides in you. And I'm sure she doesn't confide in the other boys in class. That's not a bad start, is it? Remember Mum and Dad were friends before they fell in love and got married? You can start by being a great friend to Janice. And when she realizes how much she likes you, trusts you, confides in you, things can develop from there. People often start with being friends first. Mum says that is the best way to start a long-lasting, enduring relationship. She said that for a relationship to last, you need to begin by being the very best of friends. But I don't want to be Janice's friend. Don't you get it, Eric? I want to be her boyfriend. I want much more. Well, if you really like her, Danny, you might have to exercise some patience first. Rome was not exactly built in a day, was it? When have I ever been patient, bro? You know me. I like to rush into things. That's my point, Danny. Another thing, bro, that you should consider. You like this girl, Janice, because she looks great on the outside. And yes, physical attraction is important. But it's not everything, is it? What's that supposed to mean, Eric? Well, you don't know her, do you? She might not be that nice on the inside. From what you're telling me, she sounds like quite a pushy personality. I personally don't like that in a girl. It's like her ambition to get Lucas Fairweather to like her is pretty assertive, don't you think? She might be that doggedly determined type that would probably step on other girls to achieve her goal. And in my book, that's not desperately attractive. I'm only saying I prefer to be chasing, not the other way round. Well, if her inside is anything like her outside, I'm very interested, said Danny, giving me a goofy grin that even made me smile, so that we both enjoyed a brief laugh together. Look, Eric, said my brother earnestly, we've got to make Janice see how pathetically inadequate and parsimonious Luke really is, so she won't want anything to do with him. When she finally comes to her senses and realizes that Luke is a prize board-certified jerk, then she will look at me instead. She'll realize how she badly overlooked the prize bit of rump steak, which is myself, of course. I chuckled, raising a brow. I see it's like that, is it, Danny? I've got an idea, Eric, and I need you to help me on this one, said Danny very excitedly. I believe it will work. We need to humiliate Lucas, like he did to me. And furthermore, I know exactly what to do. I think my plan will work. I'm banking that it will. I'll do anything to get Janice to see me as boyfriend material. Look, I don't want to be any part of this, bro, I said, shaking my head vigorously. I'm sorry. You need to leave me out of this, will you? Why don't you just tell Janice Kildare straight to her face how you feel about her? I mean, what have you got to lose? If she blows you off, who cares? There are plenty of other fish in the sea, aren't there? Besides, I don't think she's all that. I think Amy Price from church is a whole lot better. Besides, I don't like the way Janice asked you so blatantly how you could make Lucas Fairweather notice her. That's a real turn-off, if you ask me. My brother grabbed me by the collar, expunging my airways once again. He finally let go so that I could breathe, and then he said, What was that you were saying, bro? All right, I'll help you, I agreed. As long as you don't hurt Lucas Fairweather, then I'll come on board with this ridiculous game of yours. It's more like something a girl would do. But just so you know, I'm not happy about this. Don't you worry, Eric. The only hurt that is coming Lucas's way is humiliation. And believe me, humiliation stings, and I want him to be on the receiving end of it. I never said anything about hurting him, did I? I'm not a monster. All I intend to do is give him a taste of his own medicine, to blow his pride, to make him look sufficiently foolish, so that Janice Kildare no longer sees him through her rose-coloured spectacles, in the pathetic way she does at the minute. It's like being in a candy store, and realizing that the Reese's chocolate you thought was so very nice really does not compare with the Hershey's Gold Bar after all. Oh, I teased. No prizes for guessing who's the Hershey Gold Bar, then. Even my brother laughed at that, and waved a mischievous finger at me. I think you finally get it, Eric. I was not looking forward to the next day at school, by any manner of means, as I had no idea what Machiavellian scheme my brother had planned for Lucas Fairweather, and part of me did not want to know either. I had been told that at lunch break I needed to meet my brother in the woods that fringed the far end of the school playgrounds, and that I was to be there at the earliest opportunity, almost before the school lunch gong sounded. In other words, I must not be late under any circumstances. I think I got the drift. I was to learn that my brother Danny had passed Lucas Fairweather a folded-up note during the history class, where, when the teacher wasn't looking, the note was discreetly passed from one student to the next, until it finally reached Lucas. He had opened up the note discreetly, and looked at it, his face brightening. He had looked up at my brother and nodded, giving him the thumbs-up gesture. The note read, "You know the rare stamp you've been looking for? I might actually have it in my collection, as I have 2 of them, so I'm willing to negotiate. I may only let it go at a good price. Meet me alone in the woods at 12:20. Look for the oak tree, you know, the prominent one, with the hollow stump that you can't miss. I'll show you the stamps I'm willing to exchange with you, if you're interested, that is. I'll give you first refusal, since you've been asking around for this stamp for quite some time." Lucas Fairweather had flashed my brother a stunning bright smile, and sent my brother back a note that was passed discreetly once again from one pupil to the next, saying he was very interested indeed. "If it's the stamp I'm looking for, I'm very keen. I'll meet you at 12:20 in the woods. Yes, I know the hollow oak tree you're talking about. That's where the kids hang out if they want to smoke in secret. See you there." When I was at school, some people were very serious about stamp collecting. It was a hobby that indulged many people's interests, myself included. Everyone fantasized about owning some rare, highly sought-after stamp that one day would be worth a sizable fortune. I mean, we could dream, couldn't we? Sadly, all these years later, I even wonder what happened to my old stamp collections. We'd get stamps from all over the world. There were hundreds of these things, along with the pristine first-day covers that were highly sought after at the time. If you were from that generation, you'd have a very good idea about what I'm talking about, and are probably wondering what you did yourself with your stamp collection, which might be buried somewhere in your attic, gathering dust. I know that Lucas Fairweather was an impassionate stamp collector that took his pastime very seriously indeed. As I was saying, he'd been asking around for a rare stamp for quite some time that he wanted to add to his collection, which was hard to attain, and was considered a stamp that one day might be worth a lot of money, and those were the stamps that were naturally in high demand and hard to come by. Ostensibly, even with my own stamp collection, I would regularly ask people at school if they had any particular stamps that I was looking for, to exchange with some of my own. The exchanges could range from chocolate bars to marbles, posters, objects of interest, and of course money, and then let's not forget stamps as well. But I do know that Lucas also acquired stamps from people by completing their math homework for them, or helping them with an essay that they were struggling with. I was very impressed with my brother's artful guise. Let's not kid, with a rare stamp on offer like this, Lucas Fairweather would easily walk into my brother's cunning trap, without so much as batting an eyelash, or becoming remotely suspicious in any way. Besides, he had no idea that my brother had such an axe to grind with him. I was probably the only person in our little bubble that knew how much my brother despised the young teenager. I do recall very vividly that when the gong sounded at exactly 12 for lunch, with a withering reluctance and hesitancy, I made my way through the elegant red-bricked arched corridors of the school, wondering if I could get away with not showing up in the woods at all. Why did Danny need me to be part of this crazed plan of his? Why did he always so annoyingly drag me into his little battles? If he wanted to degrade Lucas Fairweather, he could do it himself, couldn't he, without including me in this senseless, rather fruitless endeavour? I ran through a manner of excuses in my head, from an inexplicit, thundering headache that had seized me during class, to a sudden bout of very bad diarrhoea that had left me permanently stuck to the loo seat all morning. Alas, with an unfortunate reputation for never having a sick day in my entire life, my brother was unlikely to fall for such sly chicanery. He may be many things, but being an idiot was not one of them. I resigned myself to the contrite fact that I'd have to help my brother, even though I wanted no part of it. I hurriedly scrambled across some of the sports fields and school grounds to the verdant woods that fringed the back of the property, and spread out for many miles, branching out into a bushy, rather overgrown labyrinth of trails. It wasn't uncommon to encounter horse riders in these parts, but we had been told by our rather domineering school principal, Mrs. Kenridge, that pupils were never allowed under any circumstances to go into the woods on their breaks. Anyone who disobeyed these rules would get into serious trouble. When a school principal lays down the law and tells you what you can and cannot do, it can sometimes have the opposite effect, almost driving you to deliberately hang out in the woods, just to be contrary and bloody-minded. It always felt rather good to challenge all those boundaries. Ostensibly, many disobeyed the stringent rules, especially if they wanted to have a smoke without being observed by a teacher, as being caught smoking could land you into heaps of trouble, as back in my day, the teachers lacked leniency, and detentions and the occasional suspension from school were not uncommon. The formidable Mrs. Kenridge, our head teacher and principal, had rigidly fixed opinions on absolutely everything. It was always her way or the highway, and she was certainly big on disciplining insubordinate pupils, and seemed to get some measure of pleasure from it. Was it any wonder she was actually called the Bull Terrier? One of the boys, called Duncan Wallace, had been caught sneaking into the woods, and had been suspended on one occasion for over 3 days. This was not something any teacher did lightly, but Mrs. Kendridge did it with no problems at all. So I circumspectly scanned my environment to ensure that no snooty-nosed teacher had seen me clandestinely sneaking into the woods. You had to have your wits about you in this regard. Getting caught only happened to pupils who were not vigilant enough, and that was not going to happen to me. Me and my brother enjoyed hot school lunches every single day at the canteen, which offered a delicious range of food from hamburgers, pizza pockets, meatloaf, pasta and vegetables. We were lucky to be blessed by an excellent cook, a plump woman by the name of Mrs. Berry, who had grown up in America and ended up living in England for a short while after she married an Englishman. I'm not sure why she got divorced from him, but I know she never ever married again. She promptly returned to America when the marriage was over. Ostensibly, in her possession, she had a repertoire of English recipes, of which the puddings were a firm favourite with her. Mrs. Berry had an unquenchable sweet tooth, so she'd happily introduced some hearty, full-bodied English puddings to the menu at the school canteen for the pupils to enjoy, including herself, I suspect. All the pupils, including myself, became hooked on these traditional, sweet, comforting puddings that Mrs. Berry so eagerly dished out, ranging from spotted dick to apple crumble and sticky toffee pudding, which I understand became a firm favourite of Madonna's when she lived in the United Kingdom for a while, and if you haven't tried it, you really must. If you've got an unquenchable sweet tooth, you will quite literally think you've died and gone to heaven when you've tasted that. In the beginning, when Mrs. Kendridge, our headmistress, saw we were having English food introduced onto the menu, which also included things like shepherd's pie, bangers and mash, and fish and chips, which are favourites in the United Kingdom, she became quite affronted, was not too pleased, complaining that our all-American school should be faithfully serving up traditional American fare, as English food, she protested, was completely inferior to the American equivalent. Everyone knew that food in England was wishy-washy. Well, that is what it was assumed. So we needed to maintain high standards in our school, she would say repetitively. Mrs. Kendridge was about as patriotic as you could get. She proudly wore the brooch of the American flag on her person every single day, and regularly encouraged us to sing the Star-Spangled Banner, the national anthem of America, every morning in assembly. Mrs. Kendridge's complaints became oddly mute when she herself became devoted to the steamy English puddings on offer that had been produced by Mrs. Berry. Our string bean of a headmistress had suddenly mysteriously grown a whole lot plumper since Mrs. Berry arrived on the scene to take charge over the school canteen. We thought Mrs. Kendridge was one of those people that was incapable of putting on weight, but how wrong we were about that. When she mysteriously ballooned, like Violet in the blueberry scene in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, who grew as round as the most enormous blueberry you've ever seen, and had to be taken to the de-juicing room in order to be deflated back to her normal standard size. Regretfully, Mrs. Kendridge could not be de-juiced, but she grew very round indeed, and she really did look like an oversized blueberry, sporting a couple of matchstick legs. I don't think she ever regained her string bean proportions, as Mrs. Berry's puddings were quite literally like crack cocaine to her. In the past, Mrs. Kendridge had never been remotely interested in the bland flavours of food produced by the chef for our school canteen, who had once, I believe, worked at a local prison, and had made everything look as appetizing as dishwater. But boy, did things change once Mrs. Berry came along. Mrs. Kendridge would eat at the canteen at the head of the teacher's table every single day. She wore that authoritarian look on her face that made you think of a dangerous pit bull in a fenced yard that might just pounce on you if you dared enter the premises. One boy in my class called Paul Walker, who was not predisposed to telling tall stories, had been sitting at the teacher's table one day. His mother was rigorously complaining that he was a very fussy eater and needed supervision from the teachers, so that's why he was eating at their table. Paul confided in me that he observed Mrs. Kendridge tucking into 6 bowlfuls of apple crumble and custard in just one go, and much as I love apple crumble myself, even I could not eat that much. She was also given a Tupperware container of apple crumble to take home with her from Mrs. Berry, who was blushing with abject delight when Mrs. Kendridge was praising her for the puddings. "I was wrong about you, Mrs. Berry. I really was. You're an asset to our school. You really, really are. And I must say, we all agree, the puddings have changed our lives. The food at our school is no longer bland." The teachers all nodded in agreement, and Mrs. Berry looked as pleased as Punch to be so appreciated by everyone. You can guarantee one thing, that Mrs. Kendridge was not going to share that apple crumble, given to her in the Tupperware container, with her husband that evening. I can bet on that one. My stomach began to rumble as I could smell the lunch on the wind. But the worst part of it all was I could smell the buttery aroma of caramelized apples and cinnamon. I groaned in bitter disappointment. The smell meant apple crumble was on the menu today. Just my luck. Why did they have to be serving up my all-time favourite English dessert, today of all days? I was seriously missing out. I couldn't think of food right now, although I was already drooling. For some reason, when I was 16 years old, well, actually I was 15 at the time, I was always hungry, and the smell of food wafting down the school corridors was never easy to ignore. If I wanted to appease my brother with one of his crazy nonsensical schemes for the purposes of making a girl called Janice Kildare believe that Lucas Fairweather was a board-certified jerk, I would need to get to the woods right now, and there was no time to lose. It would seem my brother was willing to try absolutely anything to get Janice Kildare's attention diverted into his direction. The big monumental question was, would this stunt of his actually work? You cannot force someone to fancy you if they don't. But I never did tell my brother that. I needed to play along with my brother's unsung tune, even though it bordered on the ridiculous. It was a pretty spring day, with sadly only a brief splattering of sunshine on offer, as a trophy reminder that warmer days were still to come. A cool breeze was blowing through the trees, causing their sculptural boughs to both jiggle and dance. Some of the blossoming dogwoods took my breath away, they were so magnificent. Alas, the days had still not completely forgotten the formidable grip of winter's fearsome hold, that seemed as doggedly determined to keep everything cold, like an ice maiden, not yet ready to give up the ghost. Well, not yet, anyway. Despite the impression of spring sprinkling her beguiling gossamer charms over the school grounds, like a pretty shower of bridal confetti, there remained a tenaciously strong-willed icy nip to the air, that implacably trespassed through my school blazer with a hostile nudge that was causing me to shiver. I was longing to be in the cosy warmth of the school canteen, as the Arctic wind was freezing through to my bones, marrow, and sinew. It certainly didn't help me being rather on the skinny side. I lacked the ample cushioning to keep out the elements. No wonder no one was out here smoking in the woods. They had more sense than to be out here, in the grip of this frosty assault. There wasn't a solitary soul around. Everybody was indoors, sensibly eating lunch in the dining hall of the school canteen, wisely keeping away from venturing out of doors. I observed the stone-washed pale bleached grass of the school lawn, that was still wearing the blanched memories of the bleak winter on its thick carpet that it stubbornly refused to shake off. Yet despite this intransigent resistance, I could see green shoots of recovery were fighting through the dead grass to defeat its drabness, with a small measure of success, but not much. I was quick to notice that daffodils, my all-time favourite spring flower, that had not been there a week prior, were now cheekily peeking through the ground with a merry twinkle, like vast battalions of yellow soldiers, waving their bright springtime flags in the air to announce the arrival of spring. but I couldn't help but feel they were premature. I entered the woods with a due caution, expecting to hear my brother calling out to me. I could smell the lingering scent of pine needles mixed with the earth. The smell was very agreeable. I could hear the cheerful trills of the bird song. For a brief moment I almost forgot about the seductive allure of Mrs. Berry's melt-in-the-mouth delicious apple crumble, served with dollops of steaming yellow custard. I marvelled at how bewitchingly beautiful the woods were, with squirrels darting up the trees, looking at me curiously through dark, earnest eyes, as if to ask me what I was doing there. I didn't know the answer to that question myself. What was I doing there? It would seem everything apart from myself was happily singing a spring tune, even if the weather was still a bit on the bleak side. Deciduous trees mingled proudly with evergreen ones, without any species prejudice. Some trees boasted boughs adorned with garlands of delicate blossoms, while others sported branches sprinkled with tiny new glossy leaves. The fallen leaves from the previous fall had turned into a rich earthen mulch that generously fed all the plants and trees. No wonder everything was so lush. It would seem the demonstrative signature of spring had already been written on the page, even though it wasn't fully expressed yet. "Oh, there you are," said my brother in a brusque tone of voice, grabbing me so hard by the arm that I flinched. "Ouch! That hurt, Danny," I complained. "You didn't have to grab me so hard. I'm not made of wood, you know. I thought you were never coming. What the hell kept you so long? Why did you dawdle? How come it took you so long to get here? Are you a snail or something?" "I wasn't dawdling, bro. I got here as fast as I could." "Where's the snake?" I asked my brother, who was carrying a long rolled-up piece of rope in his hands that he was twisting in his fingers. "What snake?" my brother asked. "I never said anything about bringing along a snake, did I? Where the hell did you get that absurd idea from?" "Well, I thought you wanted to scare Lucas Fairweather, didn't you? I thought a snake would be the most obvious thing for you to use. You did say you wanted to humiliate him, and you know he's terrified of snakes. Oh, I've got a better plan than that, bro. I've got it all masterfully worked out. First of all, I need to deal with Lucas Fairweather by putting him in a humiliating position and see how he likes it then. I, for one, cannot wait to see him squirm, like when you put salt on a slug. I'm really going to thoroughly enjoy every minute of this," said my brother, rubbing his hands together in glee. I pulled a face. "You are horrible, Danny," I said. My brother chuckled. "I never did say I was Snow White, did I? The best thing about this intrepid adventure of ours is that Janice Kildare will be here later on to witness Lucas's dramatic fall from grace. I've asked my good friend Josh Adams to give Janice a note at 12:30 in the canteen. The note is asking her to meet Lucas in the woods at 1:45, as he has something important to tell her. She won't turn an offer like that down in a hurry. She fancies the pants off him, doesn't she? But not for much longer. Hopefully she'll see Luke Fairweather looking very sorry for himself indeed. There is no bigger turn-off for a girl than a helpless man. I remember reading it somewhere. Number one turn-off for a lady is an impotently powerless man. This way I can get Janice Kildare to start paying attention to me when she realizes that her fantasies over Luke were completely groundless. "What the hell are you planning to do?" I asked my brother. I was now being quite assertive. "You said this was going to be simple and straightforward, that this prank of yours was benign. I don't like the look of that rope you're carrying in your hands. It's giving me the heebie-jeebies. I need to remind you, Danny, you promised me you are not going to hurt Lucas. Now you're beginning to scare me." "Of course I'm not going to hurt Lucas. I gave you my word, didn't I? What do you take me for? Did I not tell you over a dozen times that the purpose of this little exercise, or rendezvous if you like, is to humiliate Lucas, and to succeed in my endeavour? I need Janice to see and witness this humiliation, but I also need to recruit your help. Do you see that spruce tree over there, the one covered in thick needles? It would be hard to miss it. What about it?" I asked my brother. "Well, when Lucas walks over to this hollowed-out oak tree, where I've arranged to meet him, and where I will be hiding. I want you to call out his name from where you're hiding, behind that spruce tree over there, so he will be distracted and naturally turn around to look in your direction. That is when I will discreetly pounce on him from behind, so he won't see me coming. I need to have an advantage over him, or he might fight back, and we can't have that, because Lucas is strong. That's what you're going to do, humiliate him? Isn't that a little lame? You're going to pounce on him, is that it? It's a bad idea, bro. Let's call it a day, shall we? This is stupid. I don't know about you, but I'm starving hungry. Most of the food will be gone in the canteen by the time we get back. Mrs. Berry has made her famous apple crumble and custard for dessert today. I, for one, do not want to miss it. Let's get back in time for that. And give this idea of yours a rain check, shall we? Think about this some more, Danny, before you blindly rush into something you may regret later. Typical, said my brother, scoffing. Only you, Eric, could think of Mrs. Berry's apple crumble at a pivotal, consequential time like this, when I'm actually relying on you to help me. I should have known you would behave like this. You're so predictable. You know what, Danny? You're a wuss. You hear that? A wuss. I knew you would try and wimp out on me, as you always do. But I'm sorry that's not going to wash. I'm not a wuss, Danny. I just feel uneasy, that's all. Forgive me for questioning this prank of yours. I need to know what I'm getting embroiled in, don't I? I mean, you still haven't exactly told me what you're planning to do. This whole thing stinks. It sounds a little frivolously jejune to me. I don't like the look of that rope you're carrying. If Janice Kildare knows you're behind this contemptible slap-happy charade, she'll never give you a second glance. And you don't want that, do you? You'll be the one that ends up looking vacuously dull-witted and brainless with egg all over your face. I know what I'm doing, Eric. I'm not stupid. Believe me, I'm going to come out of this smelling of roses, said my brother confidently. I am very confident that this is going to work out. I feel it in my gut. I rolled my eyes in the back of my head in exasperation. I doubt you, Danny. I really do. I don't think you can pull this off. My brother grinned. It was a cocky look. You mark my words. Janice Kildare, after witnessing Lucas's humiliation, will be having a milkshake with me in town this Saturday, after which we can play some mini-golf together. I've got the date planned out very nicely for the two of us. I wouldn't get ahead of myself if I were you, Danny, I told my brother. Being overconfident isn't a good idea. Things can go badly wrong. So what is this adept plan of yours anyway? My brother shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly. I was saying, bro, you don't need to know all the details. Just do exactly as I say. I'm relying on you not to let me down, Eric. If you do, you will have a repeat trip to the ER with a minor concussion, and I can assure you of that. And we would not want that to happen to you, would we? I mean, if you were lying here comatose in the woods, who would come to your aid? You won't be lying under the saucer magnolia tree this time, will you? Think about it for a moment. Mum wouldn't know where you were, would she? And I do know that there are opportunistic coyotes that wander around the woods at night. They look for easy pickings, and someone like you that's blacked out won't know that they're being eaten alive, will they? Bro, why are you threatening me like this? You're not being serious, are you? I hope you're only joking. You would never do that to me. I'm your flesh and blood, your brother, for goodness sake, Danny. Or have you conveniently forgotten that we are brothers? Why are you talking like this? All I'm saying is don't test me, Eric. Now, for goodness sake, hide behind that spruce tree, will you? I think he's coming. I hear footsteps. Hurry, said my brother, giving me a firm push, so that I was jerked violently backwards and stumbled awkwardly on my feet to regain my posture, as I reluctantly turned around and ambled to the spruce tree, where the thick curtains of needles would hide me well. My brother was right. Someone was definitely coming. I knew I didn't have a choice in the matter but to follow my brother's bidding. as his promises to put me into a concussion were not idle threats on his part, and even if they were, I was not going to risk disobeying him. I knew when my brother's buttons were pushed, there was no telling what he was capable of doing. If I made him angry enough, that is. I had no clue what my brother's intentions towards Lucas Fairweather really were. My only solace was he had assured me that he wouldn't hurt him, and that's all I cared about. When my brother made a promise to me, he stood by it, as his words was his bond. So I was reasonably assured that Luke Fairweather would come to no harm. I had no way of knowing what would ultimately happen to him, and had I known, I would have resolutely stood my ground against Danny, and had absolutely nothing to do with this wretched scheme of his that would end up going badly wrong in ways we could never have imagined possible. Moments later we heard light feet crushing leafy debris, and fresh earthen mulch being trampled by shoes. Lucas Fairweather was treading somewhat gingerly over the forest floor. Perhaps he did have a measure of reluctance after all, coming here today. Who could blame him for that? I know I would have. Did he really not smell a rat, when only the day before he had humiliated my brother Danny in front of the entire math class? But then again, Lucas would never have seen the event through my brother's eyes. He had merely rather innocently corrected a mistake on the blackboard. And what was wrong with that? We all did that. I peeked at Lucas from behind the tree. I could see his navy blue school blazer and striped tie. I will admit his face was flushed pink with excitement, as he eagerly scanned the woods with a keen ambition. I realized he was very impatiently hankering to see the so-called rare stamp my brother claimed to have in his possession. I noticed he was carrying his special leather stamp album with him, and was looking around the woods rather pensively. His face brightened when he saw the hollowed oak tree. He stepped up his speed and sashayed towards the tree, glancing round and about himself very briefly, and then at his watch to check the time. He sighed once again, and clearly was beginning to wonder where my brother had got to, and what could be actually holding him up. I watched him pacing up and down the earthen trail next to the hollow tree, as if he was becoming ever so slightly restless. Everything seemed to go placidly quiet for a moment, or perhaps it just felt like that to me. That was when I did what my brother told me to do. I called out his name. "Lucas! Lucas!" My voice rudely interrupted the still repose of the woods. Lucas promptly turned around, as my brother had anticipated, his gaze fixed directly on the bushy spruce tree, from where I was hiding. There was relief written all over his face, as he anticipated my brother's arrival, and getting his hungry eyes onto that rare stamp. That was when my brother, in flagrant delicto, pounced on Lucas unawares, and fisted him in the head, like he had done to me once before. Lucas's eyes rolled in the back of his head. He blacked out, falling backwards onto the ground like a dead weight. I knew, of course, he was not dead. I could see the rise and fall of his chest, and the insentient blow to his head had not been that bad, but it had been impactful enough to render the young teenager comatose, and that was crossing the line as far as I was concerned. What was wrong with my brother? What the hell had he done? I was so affronted with Danny, I was tempted to pounce on him myself, and to try to punch his lights out, but I was no match for him. I could taste the bile on my tongue. I marched towards my brother, waving my fists furiously in the air. "You promised me you wouldn't hurt Lucas! You promised me, bro! Why did you lie to me? I thought your word was your bond! So much for that!" "I haven't hurt him, bro," said my brother defensively. "Look, he's perfectly fine. Can't you see his breathing? Nothing wrong with him at all. He'll be as right as rain in a moment when he comes around. He's just blacked out. It's no biggie. I wanted him to be like that." "Are you completely insane or something? I can't believe you did that. It's dangerous to do that to people. Do you realize what you've done?" I watched in horror as my brother was dragging Lucas's concussed body by his boots across the earthen ground towards the stump of the hollow oak tree, and propping him up in a seated position against the stump. He then pulled off Lucas's clothes, leaving him naked apart from his underpants, and then with a rope in his hands he circled it around Lucas's torso and tied him to the tree, so there was no way of escape for him when he finally did come around. My brother chuckled contentedly. "Aha! I can't wait for Janice Kildare to get here. She'll be here soon, and I'm looking forward to it. Wait until she sees Lucas like this, tied to the tree with no clothes on. Oh my God, she'll never be able to look at him again in the same way. And let me tell you, she's not going to fancy him any more after this. I stared at the scene gog-eyed, unable to believe what my brother had done. This was like something you'd see in a movie. This time he'd gone too far. "You're disgusting, bro," I said. I was about to walk over to Lucas and untie the rope from him and put his clothes back on to restore his dignity. My brother, reading my mind like a book, raised a hand and said, "No, you don't, Eric. This is my opportunity to get my back on Lucas. Don't you dare go ruining this for me by going all soft and soppy." Sensing my horror, my brother tried his best to appease me, with very little success on his part, as I was now very aggrieved. "Get a grip, for goodness sake, Eric. I haven't hurt Lucas. He'll come around shortly. How many times do I have to tell you that? He's fine. I hit you on the head harder than that, and you were all right, were you not? I'll remind you I went to hospital in an ambulance, Danny. I would hardly describe that as fine. I was out cold for hours. Mum initially thought I was dead. She believed some nasty thug had whacked me over the head. Lucky for you, I never snitched on you. She'd have done her nut if she'd known it was you all along. So would Dad. Grow a pair, Danny, will you? You can be such a wuss at times. This is no big deal. Lucas is going to be fine. He'll wake up shortly. I'm just getting a taste of my own medicine, that's all. Janice Kildare will be here shortly and find him tied to the tree, completely naked, with only his underpants on." At this my brother let out a gormless laugh. "How embarrassing is that? I'll hang his clothes up on that tree branch over there so he can put them on. When he recovers, we can hide and see how Janice Kildare reacts to seeing Lucas like this. My bet is she won't want anything to do with him after this, but she'll probably help him back to his feet and get him out of the woodgrove. That's if he does come around, bro. Look at him. He's out cold. This is all your fault. I knew I couldn't trust you in this insane, absolutely insane prank of yours. I don't want any part of this. I'm going back to the canteen to get some of Mrs. Berry's apple crumble and custard. And if you haven't helped Lucas out of that rope, I'll go to the principal myself and blab on you. You wouldn't dare." I glared at my brother. "I would, so you better sort this mess out. Now I'm going to the canteen." "Is that all you can think of, Eric? Mrs. Berry's apple crumble? You're pathetic." "What the hell?" he said suddenly. "Hear that? Somebody's coming. This is all we need. And I don't think this is Janice. There's two of them coming. Listen." All of a sudden we heard voices coming towards us. Two people in earnest conversation, speaking backwards and forwards in a foreign language that we were not remotely acquainted with. "Kidakilata, hopotalasina, aki, anatala nopo, ilitalikolo shansina. Itaki, hokolipati, akolosoko, akina, imashakilaki." They were chattering away so fast, I couldn't for the life of me understand what they were saying. But one of the people was definitely male, the other female. I could tell by the cadence of their voices. One was deep and raspy in tone, the other more shrill and feminine. The last thing I wanted, for me and my brother, was for us to be physically seen. In the woods, where we were in close proximity to a 16-year-old teenager tied up naked to a tree in a seemingly comatose state, as by mere association we could easily be accused of doing this to Lucas Fairweather. That would not be a good look for both of us, and despite everything that Danny had done, I still loved him. It was a natural instinct for me to want to protect my brother. Danny hurriedly pushed me behind a climbing curtain of shrubbery that overlooked the hollow oak tree, where Lucas had been tied up. I am quite sure that my brother was beginning to regret what he had done. If he wasn't, he most certainly should have been. I was regretting having agreed to be part of this nonsensical, ridiculous charade. My brother had gone way too far. to bring Lucas Fairweather down a peg or two in order to humiliate him. It was ridiculously juvenile as far as I was concerned. I was a complete idiot not to stand up for myself. How I wish I'd stuck to the diarrhea excuse. Anything had to be better than this, but it was too late to indulge in hindsight now. We could hear what seemed like 2 pairs of thunderous feet pounding the ground, snapping the vegetation loudly, as the 2 voices got closer and closer. Matila, kila kola ponti, asakila qua, hoppolitani, amicatina, kilo sopa, shikalaquana, itaki, hopotolono, olitatina tolo, akistana tua, ikili, akoko. I knew at least one of these people coming our way had to be extremely well built, as the ground almost heaved and groaned under their weight. All of a sudden the birds stopped singing, and everything became strangely mute. The feisty, rather spirited breeze seemed to dissipate, so instead of the trees shaking their branches, I was now the one shaking and trembling, like a wobbly blancmange jelly, and I had no way of stopping myself. It was an involuntary response to the extreme sense of panic that had infiltrated my whole being, almost as if a freight train at full throttle had just driven right through me at the speed of light. My brother urgently tapped me on my back, giving me an annoyed, warning glare. "Stop shaking," he whispered. "Can't you hear someone's coming? You don't want to draw attention to yourself, do you?" Did my brother not realize what a sticky situation we were both embroiled in? Things could potentially go from bad to worse for us. If we got caught for having tied Lucas Fairweather to a tree, we would be in serious trouble. If my parents learnt about this, not only would they be mortified, but we would probably be grounded for weeks on end. We might even be suspended from school indefinitely, or even expelled, if our draconian headmistress, Mrs. Kenridge, got to hear about this. She wouldn't be remotely afraid to punish us, with her methodology of tough love that our school was long revered for it made us grow up into upstanding citizens, according to her. She had always said, "Treat the pupils hard, and we will make ladies and gentlemen out of them all, and they will go out into the big wide world to become the influencers and shakers of our society." I knew we could get into serious trouble with the law as well. What the hell were we thinking? What if Lucas Fairweather told on my brother when he finally came around from his concussion, which I'm sure he would describe as a premeditated assault? To be fair, Lucas had not physically witnessed my brother Danny attack him. But then again, my brother had arranged to meet Lucas in the woods. So if you skillfully connected the dots together, the likely perpetrator to Lucas's blow to the head would of course be my brother. Danny had not stopped to think of the recriminations of his actions. I could already visualize my mother's bitter disappointment in me, hear her words ringing in my head as clearly as the rain on a tin roof. "Now I could imagine Danny doing something like this, but not you, Eric, never you. Your brother can lose it at times, go very astray. But you, Eric, how could you be part of this poor teenager's dreadful assault? I can hardly believe it. The poor young teenager was struck on the head by your brother's fists. And you didn't even stop him. You let your brother tie the poor teenager to a tree with a rope, with no clothes on. It's an absolute disgrace. I can barely look at the both of you. This could be considered a serious offence by the police. And your brother did all this for the attention of a girl he liked. For goodness sake, what on earth was Danny thinking? And what about you, Eric? You played a part in this too. You should have stood up to your brother, but you did not. I'm very disappointed in you." As I was musing over all of this, wondering who was coming our way, my eyes nearly grew as round as saucers when 2 Herculean hair-covered silhouettes with human-looking faces came into my line of vision. I could see Danny's jaw drop wide open in astonishment. His eyes rolled back in surprise. The 2 of us could not physically believe what we were observing. At the time we had no way of knowing what these 2 tall, lofty, human-like creatures were, but they were incredibly intimidating, with overlong arms and burly, powerful physiques. They were about 8 and 10 foot tall, and were built as powerfully as an ox or an elephant. Everything about them was mighty. One was male, the other female, and they were walking together side by side, chatting furiously fast, backwards and forwards, and expressing themselves with big, all-expansive hand gestures. Kila tila konopo asika. Minatala ikatila kwana hopa kilaki o tilanakwa. Sometimes it seemed like they were acting out what they were actually saying, which my brother sometimes tends to do. Ostensibly for a casual observer, who was not in the thick of it like me and my brother, this encounter was both bewildering, paradoxical, and absolutely fascinating. There was a lot of nodding going on between the two hairy humanoids. My heart was now racing thunderously in my chest, my knees crumbling beneath me. I was absolutely petrified. What if these daunting, Herculean-sized creatures actually physically saw us? My brother kept jabbing me with his finger, pointing out the blindingly obvious. He was trying to tell me to stop trembling, but I was so scared I had no way of controlling my fear. My brother remained very composed. He seemed more curious than afraid, and was watching the scene unfold before us with a measure of curiosity. He was clearly a lot braver than I was. I could hear him say in a low whisper, "Bloody hell, you've got to be kidding me. Is this even real?" My heart began to actually rattle in my chest when the two creatures that I now know were Bigfoot stopped dead in their tracks as they walked towards the hollowed-out oak tree that framed the edge of the path. The female Bigfoot was pointing at the tree stump. She stared in absolute bemusement at Lucas Fairweather, lying there in a comatose state. The young teenager had not yet come around from the blow he had sustained to his head. He must have been hit harder than my brother had claimed. I was now incredibly disquieted. My first thought is, what will happen if these two creatures decide to eat Lucas Fairweather for a meal? You must remember I had no understanding of what they were, and they were nothing short of terrifying in my book. The female simply bent down into what I would describe as a downward dog posture, and with a powerful overlong arm, she ripped away the rope off Lucas's semi-naked body, almost as if he'd been tied to the tree with a string of candy floss. She continued to squat on her two strapping legs, bending down to examine Lucas more closely. His head flopped from one way to the next. I think I remember her slapping his cheek to get his attention, but he failed to respond. The two creatures began talking together backwards and forwards in their strange language, as if they were discussing what was to be done with Lucas Fairweather. "Kila tikilaka, hopati, aki kwasa. Kila, midatala matila, hikala kwaku. Kila tita, umonotolo pani. Shinafata, bila kila kwa, hisanato." It would seem the male had the deciding vote on what they were discussing, or the final word, if you like. The lofty male that was built like a brick shithouse, excuse the language, just threw Lucas over his shoulders, and the female grabbed his clothes that were hanging on a tree branch, and then they glided away and were gone. All that was left of Lucas Fairweather was his leather stamp album. It lay splayed messily over the ground, half opened, with some loose stamps spilling from a manila envelope. They sprinkled the forest floor like chopped square pieces of confetti. And there was the snapped rope, lying at the bottom of the tree stump like a coiled-up snake. I picked up the sturdy piece of rope to examine it closely. I could only ponder how anyone could be strong enough to snap it, as if it was nothing. I still have that piece of rope in my possession today. Me and my brother locked gazes. We stared at each other in a confounded, stunned, stupefied silence. We were unable to articulate our feelings about what had just transpired, because it seemed all so unbelievable. This was a board-certified disaster, if ever I saw one, and it certainly couldn't get worse than this. Where the hell was Lucas Fairweather? And more to the point, was he going to be all right with those creatures? That was the $101 question, and I didn't have a good feeling about it. I felt nausea rising in the back of my throat. I hurriedly ran over to a tree to throw up the contents of my stomach. I felt so overwhelmed about everything. I saw huge remorse in my brother's eyes. He now feared for the well-being of Lucas Fairweather. The young teenager may not have been his good friend, but no one would wish this to happen to another human being, unless, of course, they were intrinsically evil, which Danny was certainly not. He may have been many things, but he was not evil. Lucas Fairweather didn't deserve any of this to happen to him, and my brother knew that. We had no way of knowing what would become of him, but I feared the very worst, suspecting that he might already be dead. I knew that me and my brother Danny could not tell anyone about what had happened in the woods if we wanted to stay out of trouble. Besides, would anyone believe our bizarre, outlandish account that two hairy humanoids had whisked Lucas Fairweather away? They'd likely think we were making up outrageous fairy stories, and who could blame them for that? Moments later, we heard footsteps. Oh my God, someone was coming. We did not need this, not at this moment, not after everything we'd just been through. My stomach began to heave and groan, as if just beating was too much like hard work. Even my knees seemed to be giving way beneath me. Someone was coming down that footpath, and they were too close for comfort. My brother grabbed me quickly. We returned to the sanctuary of our hiding place. We were relieved to see it was Janice Kildare. Her face looked flustered with excitement. There was an eagerness to her gait. She was looking around the woodgrove for Lucas Fairweather. Her eyes then fell to the earthen floor, as she observed Lucas's stamp collection, well, the leather album, that is, lying messily splayed on the ground. She probably knew Lucas would never treat his property this disrespectfully, as this was a valued stamp collection to him. We heard her saying, "What the hell?" She picked it up and collected all the stamps, replacing them into the manila envelope, and with a look of concern dappling her face, she called out Lucas's name. "Lucas! Lucas, are you there? Lucas! Lucas, it's me! It's Janice! Lucas!" After waiting for a while and deciding that Lucas was not here, she promptly left the woods, probably very disappointed that her rendezvous with Lucas had amounted to absolutely nothing, for she had probably hoped it would be of a romantic nature. "My God," said my brother, after Janice had left the woods. "Did that happen, bro? Did you see the size of those gargantuan things? They were monstrously huge." He whistled. "What the hell? Have you ever—" I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, like the bubbles in champagne. I glared at my brother. "Look what you've done, Danny! This is all your fault. I hope you're proud of yourself." "What do you mean, all my fault? You had a part in this too, remember, Eric? Or have you conveniently forgotten about that? It's so typical of you, Eric, to just renege all responsibility. I may remind you, you are as involved as I am. I did not put a fist to Lucas's head, did I? Nor did I remove his clothes and tie him to a tree half naked. What you did was psychopathic, Danny. It's not funny. You're an animal. Do I look like I'm laughing, Eric? Of course I'm not. I didn't expect for things to go so pear-shaped, did I? You have to admit the plan would have worked superbly if those two burly, hair-covered things hadn't come along to ruin everything for us. It was bad timing, that's all. Very bad timing." "Bad timing? Is that what you call it?" I scoffed. "You were the one who wanted to humiliate Lucas in front of Janice Kildare," I reminded him. "I thought you were going to throw a snake at him or something like that, but no, you went far too far. You hit him across the head with a fist. You made him concussed. Whatever way you look at it, bro, it was assault. There's no other word for it. You assaulted Lucas. When those creatures found him, he was out for the count. What if they eat him up or do something dreadfully horrible to him? They were terrifying. Did you see the size of them, Danny? I feel so sorry for Lucas Fairweather. He deserved none of this. All because you were just so jealous of him. You couldn't bear it that all the girls in class fancied him. You couldn't bear it that he was so successful at math and all those subjects. You were so jealous of him. And now you're going to have to live with what you've done. He could be dead right now, for all we know, thanks to your cauliflower idea. For your sake, I do hope that Janice Kildare was worth it." My brother grabbed me by the shoulder. He looked at me with a warning glare. "No one knows about this, Eric. Understand? None of this ever happened. Get it? Lucas Fairweather may be dead. You could be right about that. And if I go down for this, so do you. Get it? Besides, I never killed him, did I? I simply gave him a blow to the head. And of course I regret that. because I think I hit him harder than I should have done. That's your problem, Danny, isn't it? I don't think you're aware of your own strength. You gave him a big blow. But maybe it's just as well, because if those creatures do eat him up, which I'm certain they will do, then at least he'll be out for the count. You really think they're going to eat him? My brother asked me. Of course I do. Why do you think they took him away like they did? Oh my God, said my brother, running his hands through his hair, looking very disquieted. What the hell have I done? You're right, bro. I went far too far. And Janice Codair is not worth this. I nodded. I won't say anything, Danny. I'm not completely stupid. My lips are sealed. I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want to be locked up indefinitely. By the way, do you agree with me? I asked for a second time, to confirm my worst fears and suspicions. Do you think the two creatures are going to eat Lucas? My brother's expression was troubled. He looked tormented. He nodded. Why else would they have taken him off like that? He was an easy meal, was he not? Those things, whatever they are wild and dangerous. That's very clear. They must have thought it was Christmas to see their prey tied up to a tree like that. It's like finding a large sheep in the deep freezer that's been prepared for you by the butcher. Why do you think the female creature took Lucas's clothes away with her? Why would she do a thing like that? My brother shrugged his shoulders. Good question, Eric. I'd be damned if I know the answer to that one. You don't think by any chance they might have been trying to help him? I asked, with hope billowing in my heart. Absolutely not. Chance would be a fine thing. Why would they ever help him? Said my brother. I do remember it went around the school like wildfire, that Lucas Fairweather had just vanished from school, without anyone knowing what had happened to him. He was described as having mysteriously vanished without a trace, like those 411 cases you hear about. Even Janice Codair didn't have the courage to come clean about finding Lucas's stamp album in the woods and arranging a rendezvous to meet him there. She probably knew she'd get into an awful lot of trouble for going into the woods in the first place by Mrs. Kendridge when it was not permitted to do so. My brother noticed she simply slipped Lucas's stamp album into a desk that he used during math class and said nothing about the planned meeting that day, although she did look decidedly sheepish, as if she was wrestling with a private guilt. As far as everybody was concerned, Lucas Fairweather had just gone missing, disappearing into thin air. No one knew where he was. It was automatically assumed that someone with ill intent had kidnapped the young teenager for nefarious reasons. Well, that was the manner of the inquiry the police were pursuing. They had received a so-called anonymous tip from a woman caller who claimed to have seen a frightened young teenager being forcefully pushed into a man's car. So the police were following this fake lead that some weirdo had obviously made up, just for the sake of it. The police came to the school to ask questions, and the school property was thoroughly searched, including the outskirts of the woods, but not a trace of Lucas Fairweather was found. No one knew what had happened, and they even had a candlelight vigil for Luke Fairweather, where tears were shed, and everyone was saying what a wonderful person he was. And the teachers kept talking about his potential, of what they believed he would one day become. This is a tragic event, if ever I saw one. A total travesty, said Mrs. Kenridge in assembly. One of our star pupils, Lucas Fairweather, has gone missing in nefarious circumstances. It grieves my heart to see this happening to one of our students. I will strongly encourage every one of you to be very vigilant, and under no circumstances should you ever accept a lift from a stranger. I strongly discourage you from hitchhiking. I know many of you teenagers do it, but I would say don't trust strangers. There are evil people in this world that live among us, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, Lucas has ended up in the wrong company. I do vividly recall at the candlelight vigil, Lucas's mother was in a dreadful state, blaming herself for allowing her son to walk home on his own. With Lucas's disappearance, everyone began tightening the reins. Pupils were forbidden from going anywhere without parental supervision. People feared the very worst, and everyone naturally assumed that Lucas Fairweather was dead. Me and my brother did not assume, We knew he was dead. He had been eaten alive by those two scary humanoids that we had encountered in the woods. It was a rough time for the both of us. I was frayed emotionally and falling apart at the seams. I was so close to cracking up under the weight of my guilt. My mother wondered why I wasn't eating after I pushed my dinner plate away for 2 consecutive nights in a row. I didn't have the stomach to eat anything, as I visualized the 2 hairy creatures ripping off Luke's body parts, like dismembering the legs off an insect and eating them like you or I might enjoy a Frankfurter sausage together. Those harrowing images harassed my mind, robbing me of getting any peaceful sleep. I was developing into a nervous wreck, and I regret to say it really showed. "Love, what on earth is wrong with you?" my mother asked me, fixing her troubled eyes on me. "Eric, you haven't been looking good lately. You've got dark circles under your eyes, as if you haven't been sleeping properly. Come to think of it, you haven't been acting like yourself either. Danny, you've also grown rather sombre of late. The 2 of you are in a bad place at the moment. What on earth is going on?" "It's true," said my father, studying us through his glasses and frowning. "Something's irking the both of them. You boys have not been very communicative recently." My mother nodded. "Both of you? Normally you both have a furious appetite. You in particular, Eric. Now thinking about it, you're looking rather gaunt. You know you can't afford not to eat, or your pants will quite literally fall off you. Go on, eat your roast potatoes. They're your favourite, are they not? I've even made some apple pie for pudding. I know it's not the crumble Mrs. Berry makes at your school. I wouldn't have a clue how to make something like that. But it's the next best thing, isn't it? I can't have you losing too much weight, Eric. I'm your mum. I can't let that happen. What is going on with you, love? I wish you would talk to me. Has someone upset you at school?" "It's probably that boy at school that's gone missing. What's his name?" said my father. "What's his name again? I've forgotten. Oh, yes, Lucas Fairweather. I'm quite sure it's probably taken a toll on all the students at school. I believe someone witnessed the young man being forced into a car. What is the world coming to these days, that we have to worry about our teenagers?" "Sweetheart," said my mother, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "Is this about Lucas Fairweather, the boy that went missing? Is this causing you grievous upset? Is that why you're not eating?" A big fat sorry tear rolled down my cheek, followed by another and another. I couldn't stop myself. My brother cast me don't you dare looks. I think he was petrified I was going to spill the beans and tell my parents everything that had happened that day in the woods. But even I wasn't that stupid. I didn't want them to know anything about what had happened, and I would be a fool to divulge such a secret. "He's just upset, Mum," said my brother, interceding. "Everybody is upset at school at the moment. No one knows what happened to Lucas, do they?" "Oh, I'm so sorry, Eric. You're such a sensitive soul, aren't you, love?" said my mother, rubbing my hand. "Granted it is upsetting, I know it is, but you know what they say, no news is good news. Isn't that right, Bernard?" she said, glancing back at my father for support. But to her surprise, she did not receive it. "For heaven's sake, Patricia," said my father, giving her a formidable glare. "You do only half go on." My father may have been a man of few words, but he had something to say now. "For goodness sake, woman, don't give our sons false hope. I hate it when you do that. Everybody knows that Lucas Fairweather is dead. We would have heard something by now if he was going to be all right. I know you mean well, love, but it's best our teenagers know the truth, instead of their hopes being rudely dashed. I don't want that to happen to them. They need to face up to what is likely happening to the young teenager. It's not nice, it's brutal, I know, but we have to be big about this." "Honestly, Bernard, how can you say all that? People sometimes go missing and are found later. Why are you being so negative about this?" "Not in this case," said my father with certainty. "Everybody knows the teenager is dead. There is no doubt about this in my mind." I couldn't stomach any of this any more. This soul-destroying conversation was getting me down. So I rescued myself from the table, locking myself in the bathroom, with the taps running on full blast in the sink, while I cried my eyes out, If my brother had not been playing his silly games, then Lucas Fairweather would still be alive. This was all his fault. I had not noticed him expressing any interest in Janice Kildare of late. Maybe my brother had lost interest in her already. It would be so typical of him. It was the following morning at school, before school opened, that Lucas Fairweather was found by the caretaker, wandering around the playground aimlessly, in a dithery haze. He was terribly confused and disorientated. For a while he didn't even recognize the caretaker or understand where he was. I was so thrilled to find that he was safe and well. But I now had a new fear in my heart that surfaced, and that was that he might remember being hit on the head by my brother. Or at least that he was meeting my brother in the woods for that rendezvous. The police asked him questions, but 3 days of Lucas's life were a complete blank to him, and he never ever recovered the memories. He didn't know where he had been, as if his memory had been completely wiped out, and it seemed that his amnesia never recovered. Me and my brother knew exactly what had happened to him, so we came to believe that the two hairy beings who extracted him from the woods that day had taken him to a place of safety and nursed him back to health. But what I couldn't understand was why he had no memory of it at all. I think the blow my brother gave him to the head was far worse than we assumed, but at least Lucas Fairweather was fully recovered. I thought that Lucas might have decided to keep Storm because of those creatures that he had encountered, as people might doubt such a far-fetched story, which he would probably be unwilling to share in case he became a laughingstock. However, such an incredulous story might leave many people wondering and asking questions, but it would certainly explain why Lucas Fairweather had gone missing for 3 days, without so much as an explanation. Yet I saw no sign of duplicity in his eyes. He genuinely seemed to have no memory of the 3 days he went missing, which for me and my brother was in itself a huge relief and a godsend. It was after this inauspicious event that something in my brother changed radically. He seemed to have become calmer, more easygoing. My relationship with him improved exponentially. Even my mother commented that she hadn't seen the zombie face on my brother for a very long time. "I'm so glad to see that Danny doesn't take himself so seriously these days," she said. "The other day he was actually laughing at himself. I could hardly believe it." The weirdest thing of all was my brother never once said anything mean about Lucas Fairweather ever again, nor did he appear to have any interest in Janice Kildare. Lucas has never shown interest in the girl either. My brother courageously asked Amy Price from church on a date, and they were now seriously dating, and my brother seemed very happy and was besotted over Amy, never for a moment showing Janice Kildare even a fleeting glance. One day when I was 16 years old, I was hurriedly walking down the corridors of the school to get to my math class. I was carrying my files in my hand, and some of my notes fell out of my book, when a gust of wind blew past. It was a windy day in early autumn. Leaves were floating across the green grass, and with a huge billowing gust, my notes flew across the lawn. I promptly put down my books on the terracotta tiles in the corridor, and began to chase after my notes. And there on the grass with me, another figure came to my aid. It was Janice Kildare from Albuquerque. She was giggling as she tried to catch my notes that kept flying away. Finally she handed me several of them. We were both laughing together. "I'm Janice," she said. "You're in the class below me, aren't you? Are you not Danny's brother, Eric?" "That's right, I'm Danny's brother." "You're so different to Danny. But in a good way, I mean. I remember seeing you on my first day at school, and I was hoping you were going to be in my year. I was disappointed you were not." "I'm glad to hear that," I said. "Look, I hope you don't think this is very forward of me, but I've got 2 tickets to the movies on Saturday, and my friend Cassia can't come with me. Would you be willing to join me?" I was stunned by the invite. I was not used to a girl asking me out on a date, especially a girl from the class above me that my brother had fancied for quite some time. I thought I'd never be interested in an assertive girl, but I surprised myself because I was intrigued by Janice. I flushed pink with embarrassment and said rather coyly that I'd love to come. I did, of course, check with my brother Danny that he didn't have any lingering feelings towards Janice Kildare, as I wouldn't want to go out with her if that were the case. But Danny gave me his blessing and told me to go for it. "You're a dark horse, Eric," he said to me. "You're going for the older girls, are you?" He gave me a wink. "She's the one that asked me out," I said. "It would be churlish of me to refuse." "Ah, I see. That's the way you're going to play it, bro," said my brother, grinning at me from ear to ear. Janice Kildare became my first girlfriend, and in the beginning I was surprised to find that I really liked her a whole lot. And even though she was a year older than me, it made me feel rather mature to be going out with someone a year above me at school. One day Janice told me she wanted to tell me a big secret and show me something in the woods. She said she had something she needed to get off her chest, because we were now dating and we shouldn't keep any secrets from each other. The idea of going into the woods again was not something that remotely excited me, given my rather tumultuous memories of the last time that Lucas Fairweather was snatched away for 3 days by a couple of Bigfoot, whom in hindsight I believe took him under their charge and nursed him back to good health. The creatures I thought at the time were dangerous based on their gargantuan size were clearly benevolent. But going back to the woods again, where my fear had hit the roof, was not exactly something that I wanted to embrace. I reminded myself that if you fall off a horse, the best kind of therapy for you is to get back on it again. Perhaps a trip to the woods would not be such a bad idea after all. I only agreed to go into the woods with Janice Kildare if I could be absolutely sure that Mrs. Berry was not serving apple crumble for pudding that day, because if she was, wild horses would not keep me away. "Good job Mrs. Berry's too old to be your girlfriend," Janice joked. "I bet if Mrs. Berry was my age, you'd probably want to marry her because of her apple crumble. Do you know my dad fell in love with my mum when she made him lasagna for the very first time? That was when he knew she was the woman for him. Forget charming personality, forget good looks. That didn't count for much as far as my dad was concerned. It was the lasagna that clinched the deal for him." "You're joking, right?" I said. "No, I'm not," said Janice, chuckling. "My father would say if he could find a girl who would make good lasagna, he'd marry her in a heartbeat. And one day my mother, having heard he loved lasagna, made some for him. And it was in that moment my father promptly decided that she was definitely the woman for him, because her lasagna was the best he'd ever tasted. My mother says a way to a man's heart is through his stomach, and judging by your addiction to Mrs. Berry's apple crumble, I believe she may be right." I reflected on this for a moment. If a young woman could make apple crumble like Mrs. Berry, served up with dollops of thick custard, then yes, I probably would be tempted to marry her. It was at lunchtime at school when the gong sounded. Me and Janice Kildare made absolutely certain that no one observed us, clandestinely making our way across the school grounds towards the woods. I could not for the life of me comprehend or even understand why we had to risk life and limb going in there in the first place. But Janice was most insistent that we needed to go there for one reason or another. I was far from keen about this, but at this stage would have done anything to please my rather demanding girlfriend. It was still prohibited to go into the woods. Mrs. Kendridge, our draconian headmistress, who didn't suffer fools gladly, was as formidable and oppressive as ever when it came to her stringent, uncompromising zero-tolerance rules, and especially after Lucas Fairweather had gone missing a year prior. Her hard and fast rules had become rigorously rigid and stiff. No one under any circumstances was allowed to go into the woods to have a secret smoke of a cigarette. "If I find anybody disobeying my rules, I will ensure that they are suspended from this school forthwith. Is that understood?" "Yes, Mrs. Kendridge," the school had chorused in a monotonous cadence of bored voices that sounded as if everybody was fast asleep. "Good, I'm very glad I've made myself absolutely clear. It has come to my unfortunate attention that certain pupils in this school have been taking it upon themselves to disobey my rules, and I for one will not abide by such insubordination. If I find anyone sneaking off to have a cigarette, that person will wish that they had never been born. Have I made myself perfectly understood?" "Yes, Mrs. Kendridge," came the dial drone of voices that echoed back at her again, like an obedient drum roll. At this point I'd been going out with Janice Kildare for a few months. Once again there was a considerable nip in the air. It was a familiar, uncomfortable feeling, a repeat of Groundhog Day again in the woodgrove, as everything appeared to replicate, exactly what it had been like when I'd been here a year prior, when Lucas Fairweather, in a comatose state, had unfortunately been snatched away by 2 Bigfoot, causing me and my brother no end of horrifying disquiet, as we wondered, with hearts infested by grief and guilt, what had become of the young teenager, until thankfully he was found on the school grounds safe and well, wandering around in a dithery daze, not knowing what day of the week it was, never mind what he was actually doing on the school grounds, as his fragile, distorted memory of those few days, when he appeared to have vanished into thin air for no good reason at all, was thankfully obliterated and never recovered. "Why did you bring me here into the woods?" I asked Janice, as we walked through the trees together, listening to the pretty, cheerful birdsong and enjoying the soft gasps of sunlight that spilled through the branches of the trees from the canopy above our heads. "I just wanted to talk to you about something, that's all," said Janice. "Come and sit next to this hollow stump," she said, pointing to the oak tree, where Lucas Fairweather had been tied up with a rope by my brother. The memory of that made me shudder. "Are you all right?" asked Janice, studying me through narrowing eyes, as we sat down together on the earthen floor, our legs stretched out before us. "If you don't mind my saying, you've gone awfully white. You're shaking a little." "I'll be fine," I said. "It's just a little cold, perhaps." I tried to throw away the flashbacks that tormented my mind. "Why did you bring me here into the woods, Janice? What is the secret you wanted to convey to me?" Janice laced her hands together, avoiding any eye contact with me for a brief moment. "Do you remember when Lucas Fairweather went missing, and no one knew what happened to him? About a year ago it was." "Of course I remember. How could anybody forget a time like that?" "Well, on that day that he disappeared, I mean, I had arranged to meet him in the woods. One of the boys told me he wanted to see me. I was ever so excited. You see, I really liked Lucas at the time. I thought he was going to tell me he had a huge crush on me. But when I came into the woods, I found his stamp collection lying on the ground. His stamps were all over the place, but Lucas, he was nowhere to be seen. I picked up his leather album, and the stamps, of course, and returned them to the desk he uses for math. I never told the police what I knew. I was terribly afraid of getting into trouble with Mrs. Kendridge. You know what she's like. I was afraid of being suspended. But I think that whatever happened to Lucas Fairweather, it must have happened here in these woods. I know he has no memory of the event. Do you think I'm a bad person for not telling the police what I knew?" "Of course I don't," I said gingerly, taking her hand in mine. "We all have our secrets, don't we? We've all done things we're not proud of, things we regret." "Oh, I'm so relieved to hear you say that, Eric. I thought you'd think badly of me for not coming forward and telling the police what I knew. But I just couldn't do it. I was so afraid." "Don't blame yourself for that." All of a sudden, as we sat under the tree, I kid you not, we heard voices coming our way, a male and a female speaking quite loudly, and this time I knew who those voices belonged to. "Kinatilaka ukulapati." Minakala siya na kwa. "Hilakita olapana." Kilani. Sila fato. "Itali kolobo. Itilano." Ginagui. If ever there was a repeat of Groundhog Day, it sure was today. But thank God this time Lucas Fairweather was not tied to a tree like last time, so the events of this moment would roll forward with a different spin. That I knew for sure. "Someone's coming," said Janice in alarm. "I don't want us to get into trouble. It could be one of the teachers. What are we going to do?" We both went and hid behind a tree as the voices got closer and closer. The voices were animated and expressive, spoken in a foreign language that I didn't understand. I kid you not, once again the male and female Bigfoot came into view, talking together intently, using hand gestures to express themselves. But as I hid behind the tree, I watched them this time in abject fascination, for I knew that they would never harm me. For a moment I even forgot that Janice Kildare was next to me, as I got caught up in the moment. When I glanced at her, she was the one trembling in terror, her eyes wide open, her body shaking. I reached out to squeeze her hand. "They won't harm you," I whispered to her. "I've seen them before." Janice looked relieved and seemed to calm down a little, but she did look as if she was holding her breath. The Bigfoot stopped for a brief moment, and grew very quiet. They both looked at each other with what I can only describe as a sense of knowing, and that was when I realized that they must have sensed our presence. To my horror, the Bigfoots both walked over to where me and Janice were hiding, and pulled back the curtain of shrubbery, and for a moment we both locked eyes with the formidable creatures, who locked eyes with us in return, but they simply nodded at us, and then glided away. We could hear the distant chatter of their voices. Kilatina, kuluputulo shaka, kilati, amanasi, ikalataku, obogulo, kikakwasana, kilaso. For a long time, Janice and I just stared at each other, not saying a single word. Janice's eyes were as wide as saucers. Did that just happen? She asked me. Tell me this was a dream. I can't do that, I said, because it wasn't. What are they? She asked me. I'd be damned if I know, because at that time I didn't know what they were. Looking back, I have to smile. Janice Kildare did end up breaking my heart. I can't say I'm surprised. A new boy arrived at school and completely captured her attention, and I didn't get a look in. Lucas Fairweather never recovered his memory over what happened to him on those few days he went missing. If he did remember, then he wasn't telling anyone about the incident and keeping stum. In his shoes, I'd likely have done much the same. As was predicted, Lucas Fairweather ended up becoming a successful entrepreneur, making it big for himself. I understand he's a multimillionaire many times over, and I can't say I'm surprised about that. I'm glad to say my fun-loving brother Danny has become the most chilled person I know. We're very close, and he's now married to his childhood sweetheart, Amy Price from church. They have 2 children. As for the Bigfoots, I never saw them again, but there isn't a day that goes by that they don't cross my mind, because they seriously impacted my life. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.